Hey guys, tonight we slip off our sandals and step into the warm dusk of an Athenian courtyard where olive trees hum with cicadas, and the stone beneath your feet still remembers the day's heat. The wine's been poured, the lyres are gently plucking in the background, and you're about to join a symposium, an elite boozy dinner party where talk of love virtue and very peculiar advice flows as freely as the diluted wine. You trail behind your host. He's the kind of guy who can quote Homer between hiccups, and you're ushered to a place of honor. Pillows are stacked in a semicircle, candles flicker in shallow bowls of oil, and everyone's reclining like they've just been painted on the side of a vase. Your tunic itches a bit, but you try to look nonchalant as you take your seat. A portly man with wine-stained teeth leans in. Love, he begins, is a kind of divine madness. Great. It's going to be that kind of evening. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you, because I bet it's later than you think. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The host claps twice, summoning a procession of servers with trays of roasted figs, honeyed cheese, and suspiciously fishy-smelling dips. You try not to breathe too deeply. The evening begins not with food, but with a speech about love from a man who pronounces every syllable as though it's dipped in gold. He claims that in the beginning, humans were double-bodied creatures, 2 heads, 4 legs round like beach balls. They were split in half by Zeus for being too powerful, and now we spend our lives searching for our missing piece. So you see, he winks. Love is a kind of homesickness. You sip your wine and wonder if this counts as therapy. The guy next to you disagrees entirely. He says love is about the soul's yearning for the eternal something beyond flesh and hiccups. He's quoting Plato, obviously, who always finds a way to make romance sound like algebra. Across the cushions, a young man with dewy eyes scribbles notes like he's going to publish the ultimate guide to seduction by tomorrow morning. And here's the twist, this is the original ancient Greek guide to lovemaking. Only it doesn't have chapters or bullet points. It's half myth, half philosophy, and a whole lot of wine-soaked bravado. Nobody agrees on anything except that they've each loved badly at least once. Mainstream historians will tell you the symposium was a political and intellectual institution. That's true. But what they don't say is that it was also an excuse to flirt with metaphors. One scholar even suggests these parties were competitive performance spaces, which makes them sound like reality TV with more togas and fewer microphones. A flute player begins to play, and you realize the music is meant to make the next speaker seem wise. He's a skinny guy with anxious eyebrows and the posture of someone who thinks deeply about table salt. He insists that the best kind of love is between an older man and a younger one, because the youth uplifts the soul and the mentor tempers desire with reason. Sure, Socrates, sounds like a loophole with extra steps. Historians still argue whether these ideals of love were widely practiced or just endlessly theorized. You can't help but notice the nervous laughter whenever the more salacious examples are brought up. Meanwhile, someone else is whispering a very different kind of story. He says Aphrodite once laid down rules for seduction herself. She appeared in a dream to a priest and dictated a 12-step process involving feathers, figs, and the moon phase. You blink at him. He shrugs. It's in the footnotes. As the night deepens and the stars blink above the fig trees, the tone shifts. A guest performs a short, half-naked interpretive dance about longing. Another recites a poem so full of longing it makes your teeth ache. There's a constant low hum of flattery and quiet giggles, and somewhere someone's definitely drawing something on a napkin that would make a vase blush. The wine keeps coming. You're definitely tipsy. The reclining cushions feel like clouds now. Someone tries to explain the geometry of desire using only a fig and a bent spoon. You nod slowly, pretending to understand. There's a half-hearted applause. One of the older guests warns that too much eros will melt the spine. You assume he's being metaphorical until he describes a man who died mid-romance from sheer enthusiasm. You're starting to suspect that this whole tradition of advice is less guidance and more gossip that survived the centuries. Still, there's something weirdly soothing about it all. Nobody really knows what they're talking about, but they all speak with such certainty. It's the ancient Greek version of online forums. Each man convinced he holds the key to unlocking the human heart, but all of them still incredibly single. You lean back, the flickering torchlight dancing across painted walls of dancing satyrs and drowsy nymphs. Someone spills wine and it pools near your sandal like a tiny red galaxy. The philosopher next to you has fallen asleep mid-discussion, one hand still gesturing toward the stars. And you're still awake, still listening, still wondering how many scrolls it takes to understand desire. Or if maybe everyone's been faking it since the Bronze Age. You recline with the philosophers, which sounds more glamorous than it feels honestly, because once the wine wears off and the figs settle awkwardly in your stomach, you realize you're surrounded by a room full of very opinionated men who all think they're experts on love. And worse, they expect you to care. The evening stretches on the oil lamps burn low, and now the topic has shifted from myth to method. One scholar has produced a tiny wax tablet and is sketching something that might be a heart or maybe a snail, depending on your angle. He insists it's the anatomy of longing, which somehow includes a diagram of a hand holding another hand. Possibly. You nod politely. You don't have the heart to mention. It looks like the world's saddest charcuterie board. This is where things get delightfully tedious. Welcome to the part of the symposium where everyone starts trying to sound clever while slowly sinking into their cushions like philosophical soufflés. The guy on your right begins a 10-minute monologue about moderation in all things, including affection. His example: don't love like a thunderbolt. He slurs love like slow barley. No one knows what this means, but they murmur agreement like it's profound. Another man compares desire to a leaky cistern. A third insists it's more like a charioteer struggling to rein in two wild horses, one noble, one messy. Which, to be fair, is a metaphor Plato actually used. Mainstream fact alert. Yes, Plato really wrote about the soul as a chariot. In the Phaedrus, he described love as a divine madness sent by the gods, a pull toward beauty so overwhelming that it tears at the soul's boundaries. Historians say he meant this allegorically, but you can't help imagining a literal horse-drawn disaster crashing through someone's courtyard. Love is not for the weak, someone bellows, nearly knocking over a platter of olives. It is a sacred ordeal. Another man yawns. A third is now chewing on the stem of a fig leaf like it holds answers. You shift trying to stay alert. Someone offers you a fresh cup of watered down wine, explaining that it opens the ears of the heart. You take it mostly because it's cold and your legs fallen asleep. And here's the best part, almost everyone here has absolutely no idea what women think of all this. That's because symposiums excluded them. Except for flute girls and entertainers, this was an all-male thought party like a sleepover for philosophers who think they invented poetry. That hasn't stopped them from declaring all sorts of things about women. One of them insists that female desire is more mysterious than the tides. Another claims that women are ruled by the moon and thus better suited for cyclical affection, whatever that means. You try not to laugh. And yet, for all the confident nonsense, there's something oddly charming about the uncertainty that sneaks in at the corners. A younger man with smudged ink on his hands asks quietly, "But how do you know when someone loves you back?" For a moment, no one has an answer. Even the snoring stops. Her eyes linger, one voice murmurs, or she gives you her pomegranate. The older guest from earlier snorts. She ignores you until your bones ache. That's love. They all laugh. The debate resumes. You lean into your cushion and let their voices blur. Somewhere a pair of cicadas start singing. You wonder how many of these philosophers have actually been in love or whether they've just read about it in Hesiod and made the rest up. Fringe tidbit. Some symposia were known to feature games that tested not just memory but romantic knowledge, like improvised poetry duels where the theme was best way to seduce your neighbor's cousin. There's even one fragment that describes a guessing game where guests had to match quotes from love poems to the right mythical couples. Whoever lost had to drink from a cup shaped like a goat. Scholars still argue whether these events were structured rituals or just increasingly chaotic bacchanals with philosophical frosting. Either way, there's definitely a point at which the scrolls get wine-stained and the wisdom starts sounding suspiciously like pickup lines. Someone at the far end is now reenacting a scene from a lost comedy. It features a very confused satyr, a ladder, and a woman who keeps hiding behind an urn. You're pretty sure it's not canonical, but it gets a hearty round of sleepy applause. As the night deepens, the topic wanders to ideal pairings. One particularly earnest man insists the gods favor unions of intellect over beauty. Another declares a beautiful face is the gate through which wisdom enters. You sure it's not the gate through which bad decisions enter? Someone replies. There's a low chuckle and a half-hearted attempt at a toast. You drift for a moment, lulled by the flickering lamp and the lullaby cadence of ancient nonsense. The stone walls glow warm with lamplight, and a small mosaic of Aphrodite above the hearth seems to wink every time the flame bends. Then the speaker, now quite drunk, pauses dramatically. And when you do find your other half, he says, when your souls press against each other like tiles in a perfect mosaic, then you'll understand why we spend whole lives searching. You blink. That was weirdly touching. The group lapses into silence. Someone shifts. The crickets keep chirping. The symposium is winding down. You glance at the wax tablet again. Its awkward diagrams, its half-baked metaphors, and realize that while none of them may have nailed it, they all tried. They drew, they debated, they danced around the bonfire of their own confusion. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. If nothing else, you'll remember this, that once under ancient stars, a room full of wine-sweetened men sat together and tried with words and symbols to make sense of the wild, inexplicable ache of love, even if their diagrams looked suspiciously like meatballs. When in doubt, ask Sappho. You've stumbled away from the symposium now. Shoes dangling from one hand, your mind spinning with contradictory advice about love barley and leaky cisterns. The moon is low, and your path winds gently through a grove of olives, the leaves whispering overhead like gossiping poets. Somewhere far away, a nightingale sings the kind of song that makes you wish you were more heartbroken just to appreciate it properly. And then you hear it. A voice, soft, measured, calm like the sea at dawn. Sappho! You round a crumbling column and find her seated beneath a fig tree writing by lamplight. She doesn't look up. She doesn't need to. She knows you're here. Everyone comes here eventually when the advice of drunken men just won't do. She's scribbling lines of verse onto a wax tablet, then erasing them, then scribbling again. The scent of beeswax and sea salt drifts around her like perfume. Her eyes flick up briefly as if to say, well, are you going to sit or just hover like an awkward chorus? You sit. Here's the mainstream truth. Sappho of Lesbos was one of the most celebrated lyric poets of the ancient world. Plato supposedly called her the 10th muse. Her poetry, rich with emotion, sensuality, and occasional snark, survives mostly in fragments quoted by later authors scratched onto pottery shards or miraculously recovered from ancient rubbish heaps. Some verses are just single aching words. Others hint at entire sagas of longing. You try to ask her about eros, about the mechanics of affection, about diagrams, perhaps? But she just smiles faintly as if you've asked how the tide works. Then softly she recites, "You came and I was crazy for you, and you cooled my mind that burned with longing." You feel the words slip under your skin like warm water. This isn't a technique or a formula, it's the quiet confession of someone who's loved badly, tenderly, urgently. It's better than a scroll. Fringe tidbit time in the 19th century, scholars got so uncomfortable with Sappho's emotionally intimate verses about women that they tried to sanitize her, arguing she was merely writing from the perspective of a man, or that Lesbos just referred to a literary school. Modern consensus. They were just being weird about it. Sappho was writing about women. Women she desired praised and sometimes mourned. But historians still argue whether Sappho's poetry was primarily autobiographical, performance-based, or ritualistic in nature. Was she writing from personal heartbreak or shaping communal songs for female choruses at weddings and festivals? Or both scholars remain delightfully divided. You lean against the tree trunk, letting her voice settle into the night. Each word feels plucked from something ancient and soft. A place where desire doesn't need diagrams or chariots, just breath and longing. There's no talk of moderation here. No grand metaphors about thunderbolts. Just the raw, simple truth that wanting someone changes you makes you hum inside like a struck lyre string. Sappho pauses, her eyes scan the moonlit leaves as if they're stanzas she hasn't written yet. The heart, she says absently, is a stubborn guest. It arrives loudly, it leaves quieter. Then she hands you a scrap of papyrus still wet with ink. A new fragment. Even in sleep desire curls like smoke under my ribs. You fold it into your tunic carefully like it's a map. Around you the grove breathes. Far in the distance you can hear waves brushing the shore of Lesbos where Sappho supposedly lived and wrote. You wonder what her days looked like, composing verses with her students, watching the sea, plucking a lyre until the melody matched her mood. A breeze rustles the wax tablet on her lap. You catch a glimpse of a sketch, a curling vine around two figures leaning toward each other. No names, no grand poses, just closeness, simplicity. You ask if she ever used diagrams. She raises an eyebrow. Why would I sketch what can be sung? You concede the point. She begins to hum a melody, low, circular, hypnotic. It's the kind of tune that doesn't end so much as dissolve. Your limbs grow heavy, eyelids tugged by the weight of her voice. Even the crickets hush as if taking notes. You're not sure how long you sit there, minutes, hours, dreams. The candle at her side burns low. Sappho has gone back to writing, occasionally glancing skyward as though the stars are collaborating. And then with barely a shift in tone, she offers one last line before you go. Whatever you love, that's where your soul grows. No rules, no diagrams, just that. You rise slowly, the scrap of verse still pressed to your chest. The grove behind you fades into shadows, and ahead a narrow path winds toward the sea. You follow it barefoot, the earth warm and soft beneath your steps. Somewhere behind you, Sappho is still writing, still burning with quiet fire, still explaining love in the only way that makes sense, by making you feel it. The first illustrated scroll is underwhelming. You find it tucked inside a ceramic tube behind a market stall, wedged between something that smells like goat and something that is a goat. The scroll's owner, a leathery old vendor with only 2 teeth, but more confidence than a demigod, assures you it's authentic. You're not sure whether he means the scroll or the goat. You unwrap the parchment carefully, half expecting glowing runes or divine secrets. Instead, you're met with what appears to be stick figures, several of them, in poses you're not entirely sure are physically possible or even legal in some city-states. Still, you try to take it seriously. Here's your mainstream historical moment. Ancient Greeks did produce erotic art and instructional texts, often as part of broader medical or philosophical treatises. Some fragments suggest visual guides existed especially in private homes or among healers. But no full-fledged how-to manual with diagrams survives in its entirety. Most known references come through satire, secondhand quotes, or surviving pottery art. And this scroll, well, it's equal parts curiosity and chaos. One drawing has a figure labeled Athena's Method, which seems historically unlikely. Another depicts a diagram with arrows, numbers, and what might be an olive jar or possibly a helmet. There's a lot going on. The accompanying captions are in erratic Ionic Greek, scrawled like someone was very much not thinking with their higher reasoning faculties. One phrase loosely translates as insert affection with moderate pressure, followed by mind the knees. It's basically the IKEA manual of ancient desire. No screws, but still confusing. You look up from the scroll, slightly cross-eyed, and catch the vendor watching you. It teaches more than Plato, he says proudly. And it's less depressing. You're not convinced. A nearby stallholder overhears and offers her own opinion. That scroll's just theater, she scoffs. Real lovers note the best diagrams are drawn on skin. You can't tell if she's being poetic or just tired of explaining human anatomy to tourists. Historians still argue whether these so-called erotic guides were instructional comedic or some blend of both. One camp insists they were tools for private education, discreet scrolls shared among couples, students, or healers. Another believes they were more performative props used at parties or as part of humorous skits like adult madrigals with visual aids. Either way, it's clear the Greeks had no shortage of opinions on technique. You roll the scroll back up and thank the vendor who throws in a packet of dried figs for courage. As you make your way back toward the main path, you pass a young man reading a similar scroll aloud to a giggling group. He pauses at a diagram, squints, and says, "Wait, whose leg is that supposed to be?" There's general agreement that the artist may have taken liberties. Let's not forget many Greek vases from the 5th century BCE are covered in erotic scenes. Some are surprisingly clinical, others are ambitious. You've seen one where the man appears to be balancing on a lyre, another where someone seems to be using a flute for something very non-musical. Scholars love to debate whether these were educational tools, private commissions, or just ancient locker room humor. One fringe theory posits that some diagrams were used by traveling love priests. Yes, those were a thing who combined aphrodisiac recipes, relationship advice, and performance art in a kind of roving, romantic roadshow. You can't help but imagine a man in sandals juggling scrolls while explaining the benefits of eye contact. The scroll in your hands may not change your life, but it does make you laugh. And isn't that kind of the point? In a world where most advice comes from marble statues or overly serious philosophers, there's something refreshing about a crude little doodle trying its best to explain what the heart does on instinct. As you walk, you spot another scroll pinned to a shady colonnade. This one's even more abstract, just shapes some arrows and one distressed-looking figure in the corner, possibly yelling. You ask a nearby fruit vendor what it means. He glances at it and shrugs. Some say it's a map of pleasure. Others say it's a drinking game gone wrong. Either way, it's oddly comforting to know that even 500 years ago, people were sketching little diagrams, trying to make sense of feelings, touch, and timing. There's something universal in that, the effort to translate the intangible into something just tangible enough to giggle over. You sit for a while beneath a sun-warmed wall, letting the scroll unfurl beside you. Its stick figures catching the breeze. You imagine someone long ago young, nervous in love, copying these awkward shapes by lamplight, hoping it might help. Hoping they wouldn't mess up a kiss or a touch or a whispered line in the dark. Maybe they did mess it up. Maybe they blushed and laughed and tried again anyway. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the scroll really teaches. That love isn't a science. It's an improvisation. One with crooked arrows, smeared ink, and the occasional olive jar in the wrong place. Love potions and honey cakes. You've wandered into the market district now where smells do most of the talking. It's a mingling of herbs, vinegar, candle wax, and one faintly alarming scent you eventually identify as heated goat bladder. You pass a stall selling perfume so pungent they could resurrect the dead, another where a woman is stirring something in a cauldron while humming to herself in a minor key. You've arrived at the apothecaries where medicine meets myth and romance meets recipes. You're here for the ancient Greek equivalent of how to win their heart in 30 drachmas or less. The first shopkeeper you meet is a woman in her 40s with arms like olive branches and eyes that tell you not to touch anything. She's already in mid-sale explaining to a very anxious man that yes, the mixture contains real rose petals, and no, it will not summon uncontrollable lust. Unless the moon is right, this is where things get wonderfully bizarre. Mainstream fact. Ancient Greek love potions or philtra were real and widely used. These were mixtures sometimes ingestible, sometimes applied topically intended to stir feelings of desire or devotion. Their recipes were a mix of botanical knowledge, folk superstition, and occasionally ingredients that would get you banned from modern cooking shows. You ask what's in the most popular love potion. The shopkeeper taps her chin thoughtfully, then recites like it's a poem. Crushed anemone root, a drizzle of honey fig ash, garlic skin goat milk warmed at dawn, and one whisper to Aphrodite. Then she adds, or just wine if you're in a hurry. You're shown a collection of small clay flasks, each painted with cryptic symbols and tied with twine. One is labeled for reawakening passion. Another says storm in the heart. A third just has a spiral and a drawing of what appears to be a very enthusiastic rabbit. You hold that one carefully. Fringe tidbit. Some recipes found in dusty corners of Hippocratic texts or later compilations include truly head-scratching elements like bull bile, roasted dormouse tail, powdered antler, or famously crocodile dung. Supposedly, a woman would mix it with oil and apply it like a scented lotion. Ancient sunscreen with benefits. Historians still argue whether these potions actually had physiological effects, or if they worked mostly through placebo psychology and suggestion. Did a dab of honey and myrrh really inspire desire, or was it the whispered promise that came with it? You move to the next stall where sweets are being sold, not ordinary ones, but ritual cakes said to sweeten the heart. Honey cakes shaped like birds or moons were often offered to Aphrodite or given as gifts during romantic festivals. One particular cookie is stamped with a small heart and the phrase, "Take me with your eyes, you buy two." A nearby herbalist waves you over and offers a sample of something bright green in a small clay spoon. Snail slime, she says confidently. Improves stamina, also good for the skin. You decline politely. She shrugs. Suit yourself, your rivals won't. There's a quiet magic in all this, how love in the hands of these women and men becomes something tactile. Brewable, bakeable. Stir 3 times counterclockwise, add time, think of someone's lips. Maybe it's superstition. Or maybe it's a way to feel like you have a little control over something that usually makes you feel like a dropped liar. A young girl at a honey stand tells you her grandmother once gave her a potion recipe to make the boys notice. It involved cinnamon clove and writing their name backward on a pear. Did it work? Too well, she says, smirking. 3 of them still bring me grapes. You sit for a moment at a shaded bench nibbling one of your heart-stamped cookies. It's crunchy and floral, a little burnt on the bottom. You imagine someone 2000 years ago doing the same, waiting for a lover, fingers sticky with honey breath, sweet with hope. It's not hard to picture them mixing herbs and secret whispering charms under their breath, hiding vials in their sleeves. Because for all the grand symposium debates and overwrought poetry, sometimes love comes down to this: a cake, a potion, a whispered name at midnight. Someone bumps your shoulder gently. The shopkeeper from earlier presses a small bag into your hand. Try this, she says. It's mild. You'll dream sweeter. You thank her, though you're not sure what you're thanking her for. You sniff the pouch. Lavender, maybe, or marjoram. Possibly both. As the market thins and the shadows lengthen, you head toward the edge of the apothecary row, past a man trying to sell an Eros flute that only makes one note. You pass another offering tongue charmers, candied herbs meant to improve your flirting. He winks. You walk faster. And then beneath a crumbling arch, you spot one last item for sale, a scroll pinned to a wall. Faded ink soft edges, a recipe for something called the Loving Moon Elixir. It involves egg yolk, rose hip fennel, and a bath by starlight, no instructions. Just the ingredients and a final line. Say their name once while stirring. Say yours twice before sleep. You smile. You don't need it tonight. But it's nice to know it's there. You tuck the scroll in your belt and step into the warm air, the scents of cinnamon and thyme trailing behind you. You don't have a lover, you don't have a plan, but your pocket smells like honey and your heart feels strangely full. Which might just be the first real spell after all. Kurotrophos and the teenage crush. You've wandered beyond the crowded markets and humming symposiums past the apothecaries and honey cakes, and now you find yourself on a dusty path lined with olive trees and low stone walls. The air smells faintly of chalk dust and laurel. Ahead, voices echo, young ones, eager, breaking slightly when trying to sound impressive. You've stumbled into a boys' education courtyard, what the Greeks call a gymnasium, but with less dodgeball and more philosophical awkwardness. A group of teenage boys are seated on the ground, their togas hastily tied to their sandals kicked off. They're arranged in a loose half-circle around a man who might generously be called a tutor, though you'd guess romantic consultant based on the content of today's lesson. Now remember, he says when a lady offers you wine, always compliment the cup before the hand. It shows taste. One of the boys frowns, but what if I like the hand more than the cup? There's a ripple of suppressed laughter. The tutor waves dismissively, then say it with your eyes. You decide not to interrupt. Mainstream historical note. In ancient Greece, mentorship between older men and younger boys, especially adolescent boys, was part of an institutionalized social structure called paiderastia. This was not just educational or athletic, but also carried a strong emotional and sometimes romantic dimension. It was idealized in certain city-states like Athens as a formative bond, though not without its critics even then. Today's session seems to lean less toward philosophy and more toward practical charm. The tutor, whose robe is slightly singed at one edge, a backfired potion maybe, is giving what can only be described as flirting theory. He walks between the boys like a stage director, correcting posture and eyeline. Don't stare like you're hunting a boar, he instructs. Gaze like you're considering poetry, but don't say poetry. You're not Sappho. You snort quietly. He hears, glares, moves on. One boy stands eager to demonstrate. He steps forward, recites a line about dew-kissed hair, and promptly trips over a sandal. His classmates collapse in laughter. The tutor sighs like this happens every day. It probably does. Fringe tidbit. The Greeks had statues and shrines to kurotrophoi goddesses or female spirits tasked with nurturing youth, especially boys. They were sort of like divine babysitters / life coaches. Offerings were made for successful education, health, and occasionally romantic fortune. One small temple inscription from Attica reads, "For guidance in the matter of hearts and future touch." Historians still argue whether the romantic instruction of boys was meant to prepare them for adult marriages, maintain same-sex idealism, or just reflect an older generation's need to feel influential. What's clear is that the lines between education, courtship, and awkward performance were porous. You watch as the tutor now demonstrates the correct way to approach someone at a festival. It involves balancing a fig cake in one hand tilting the head slightly and offering a greeting that's both casual and courtly. The effect is somewhere between suave and seasick. The boys try to copy him. One spills the cake, another mispronounces the greeting and ends up saying, "Blessed are your knees." There is once again a lot of laughter. Off to the side, two boys sit quietly whispering. One nervously fiddles with a woven bracelet. The other listens, nodding slowly. There's nothing scripted in their body language, no posture exercises or planned speeches, just the soft, awkward electricity of teenage hope. You remember that feeling. You might still carry it. Nearby, someone scratched a diagram into the dust with a stick. It's clearly meant to be a step-by-step guide to making someone fall in love, but all the steps are labeled hope and wait and maybe. You find it surprisingly accurate. The tutor, tired now, calls for a short break. The boys scatter, some to wrestle, some to sneak bites of lunch, some to pass notes they insist are poems. You sit under the shade of an olive tree listening to cicadas sing their sizzling lullaby. One boy drops beside you. He looks barely 15, but his confidence is outsized. "You watching our lesson?" he asks, grinning. You nod. "I'm gonna fall in love with the daughter of a merchant," he declares. "She has eyes like a thunderstorm and once threw a lemon at me." You raise your eyebrows. Sounds promising. He beams. "I'm writing her a riddle. Riddles are the best." Wanna hear? Before you can respond, he rattles it off. "What moves without feet, curls, but is not a snake, and disappears with a smile?" You blink. "Love." He shrugs. "No idea. I just made it up." Somewhere in the distance, the tutor is shouting at someone for trying to flirt with a laurel tree. The afternoon light shifts, casting long golden lines across the courtyard. You close your eyes for a moment and let it all wash over you, the boys' laughter, the tutor's endless corrections, the hopeful scratchings in the dust. This is love education, ancient Greek style, a blend of awkward confessions, misplaced poetry, dusty knees, and too many figs. There are no diagrams here, no scrolls or sacred guides. Just teenagers fumbling toward connection, lit by the same sun that once warmed Sappho's shoulders and the same breeze that carried Plato's voice. You rise, brushing dust from your robe, and glance once more at the sketch in the dirt. Hope? Wait, maybe. Honestly, it's as good a strategy as any gymnasia, oiled bodies, and courtship rituals. By now, you've wandered deep into the city's athletic heart, a sprawling, sun-drenched complex of marble pillars, soft sand, and the kind of echoing silence only broken by the occasional grunt. Welcome to the gymnasium, the ancient Greek training ground where physical beauty was worshipped with almost religious enthusiasm. And let's just say clothes were optional. You try not to stare, you fail. Naked men wrestle in pairs, spar with wooden swords, and jog in long, dusty laps, their skin gleaming with oil that's been applied liberally, sometimes by themselves, more often by assistants known as paidotribai, who specialize in, well, rubbing. You pass a bronze basin filled with oil and another for scraping it off. Nearby, a row of strigils, curved bronze tools used to scrape sweat sand, and excess oil gleams like surgical instruments. Mainstream fact: Greek athletes trained nude not just for freedom of movement, but as a celebration of the body and a form of idealized masculinity. These gymnasia weren't just training centers, they were social arenas, educational hubs, and, yes, occasional flirting zones. Think country club meets art gallery, but sweatier. You find a bench in the shade trying to blend in, which is difficult given your lack of confidence in eye contact. A tall, curly-haired man nearby is practicing discus throws. With every rotation, he pauses, glances toward the edge of the training field, then tosses dramatically as if performing for someone. You follow his gaze. Ah, there she is. A young woman, cloaked modest, pretending to read, just happens to be passing by every few minutes. And somehow every time she returns, he's just finishing a particularly impressive pose. A classic gymnasia flirt loop. Subtle, no effective. Absolutely not. But you can't help rooting for him. Fringe tidbit. Some city-states like Sparta actually encouraged women to train alongside men, believing that strong bodies made for strong children. Spartans even believed that joint physical training promoted mutual attraction and honest admiration. Basically, sweat then flirt. In Athens, things were more segregated, but courtship often revolved around displays of athleticism, and gymnasia were hotbeds of admiration. Literally. Historians still argue whether the gymnasium was more of a place for physical excellence or social matchmaking. While the formal goal was education and preparation for war, the reality often looked more like a parade of highly oiled, deeply competitive crushes. Think ancient thirst traps, but with javelins. You move along the colonnade watching as two men square off in a friendly wrestling match. Except one of them keeps whispering things. You can't hear the words, but based on the eyebrow raises and sly smiles, this isn't your average training montage. You're witnessing the very slowest, most well-oiled courtship imaginable. Another pair finishes their bout both panting and dripping with sweat. One taps the other on the shoulder, says something short, and they laugh nervously. You sense a story there, probably more than one. Near the bathhouse entrance, a different kind of ritual plays out. A young man approaches an older one, hands behind his back. With a slight bow, he offers a small olive wreath. The older man, stoic, sun-scarred, accepts it silently. You blink, unsure what you've just seen. A local bystander leans in and murmurs, "That's a sign of admiration," or depending on the gift of intent. You nod like you understand, then whisper, "What would the wrong gift be?" "Anything involving garlic," he says deadpan. You drift toward the palaestra, the wrestling yard. Here things are more formal. Matches are observed, recorded, and judged. But between matches, the energy softens. Men sit in corners, rubbing sore muscles, sharing gossip, trading riddles. You overhear one comparing love to a thrown discus. You never know how far it'll go or if it's coming back. Poetic and also dangerous. Someone taps your arm. A young athlete, towel slung over one shoulder, offers you a small clay token with a crude figure etched into it. If you admire someone, he says, give them this after the baths. It's tradition. You look at the token. The figure appears to be in mid-cartwheel or possibly falling downstairs. You accept it anyway. Later in the steam room, bodies are slumped like wet laundry over marble benches. The scent of eucalyptus and sun-warmed skin fills the air. One man hums. Another recites a love poem in Homeric meter, which is ambitious considering most of the room is snoring. In a quiet corner, two men speak in hushed tones. You catch fragments since the festival, not just sparring her laugh. Whatever courtship began in the training yard has followed them into the baths, and maybe beyond. The thing is, for all the athletic grandeur, the flirtation here is often clumsy. It hides behind compliments, behind wagers, behind minor bruises and shared bandages. The body may be worshipped, but the heart still stumbles. And what about diagrams? You pass a wall where someone's carved figures into the plaster, two bodies locked in a kind of dance annotated with arrows and phrases like grip here and turn gently. You chuckle. Even here, love needs a visual aid. You step outside as the sun dips low, casting golden fire across the training yard. The discus thrower is still there alone now, holding his wreath and staring after someone who's long gone. He catches you looking, shrugs, and says, "At least my form improved." You nod and tuck your clay token into your belt. Who knows? Maybe later someone will understand your admiration, even if it's just the guy at the wine shop. Because here in the gymnasium, every drop of sweat is part effort, part performance, part longing. And maybe that's the whole point to sweat, to strive to be seen. The art of flirting in Doric Greek. You've escaped the gymnasium with your dignity more or less intact, and just a hint of oil still clinging to your elbow. As the city stretches toward dusk, you find yourself in a quieter part of town. Stone alleyways curve like question marks. Small shrines tuck themselves into corners, and above you, balconies lean with potted herbs and laundry flapping like surrendered flags. You hear it before you see it, the unmistakable rhythm of someone trying too hard to be smooth. You peek around a corner and spot a small group gathered beneath an ivy-covered portico, locked in what is clearly a flirt-off. A contest of charm, the stakes pride, possibly olives, probably embarrassment. A young man stands confidently reciting something that sounds like a compliment, but in a dialect so thick it's practically a dialect of itself. Your eyes, he declares in deep Doric gleam, like a well-oiled dolphin in morning tide. You pause. Did he just compare her to a sea mammal? His audience, two friends and a thoroughly unimpressed young woman, exchange glances. One mutters, "Too much dolphin." Another adds, "You should have gone with horse. Horses are safer." Mainstream fact. Ancient Greek wasn't one single language, it was a bouquet of dialects, each with its own flavor. Doric, spoken in places like Sparta and parts of the Peloponnese, was considered deep manly and a little rustic. Ionic favored in Athens, and Ionia was elegant and flowing. Attic Greek especially became the prestige dialect for drama and philosophy. So yes, how you flirted might depend on your accent, and some dialects just didn't lend themselves to romance. You inch closer and sit on a low wall, pretending to adjust your sandal. One man is coaching another. No Thygator is daughter. You said thymos, which means rage. You told her she looked like rage. They both wince. The intended recipient is already halfway down the street. Fringe tidbit. In at least one comedic play by Aristophanes, a character tries to woo someone by spouting overly complicated poetic language, and gets so tangled in metaphors that he accidentally insults their hair. Ancient Greeks had a sense of humor about overblown seduction attempts. Even then, sometimes nice sandals was better than your form echoes the bend of Apollo's bow. You follow the group as they shuffle to a new location. A public fountain where people gather to wash gossip and inevitably flirt with anyone holding a water jug. The technique seems to be compliment the jug, then pivot to the person. It's not elegant, but it's effective. One guy tries, "That's a fine-shaped amphora." The girl nods. He adds, "But the hand that carries it." She interrupts, "Don't ruin it." This may not be the birthplace of romance, but it is a crash course in humility. Nearby, a self-proclaimed poet pulls out a wax tablet and proudly reads from his latest composition. To you I offer figs and words both soft, both full of seed. There's a long silence. Then someone coughs. Then someone else says, maybe fewer seeds next time. Historians still argue whether flirting in public was socially acceptable or more of a festival-only behavior. Some sources suggest that during religious events like the Anthesteria or Panathenaia rules relaxed, and even shy citizens got bold. Others argue that flirtation had to be subtle, folded into jokes or riddles, or else risk reputational damage. Either way, the Greeks had an impressive range from painfully earnest lyric poetry to banana peel comedy masquerading as courtship. You watch as one bold teen approaches a girl selling herbs. He points to the time and says, I need something to cure my heart. She rolls her eyes and mutters, you need a bath. He backs away in defeat, but someone claps, points for trying. A tutor from earlier walks by and offers unsolicited advice. Try this. Your voice is like Orpheus playing a golden lyre, but louder. It's unclear whether this is helpful or a subtle insult. One man attempts a more visual method, drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. Circles arrows a stylized hand. You assume it's a primitive diagram of affection, or a chicken, hard to say. His crush leans over, squints, and asks, is that me? He stammers. She walks away. You're beginning to suspect that ancient Greek flirting was equal parts poetry, desperation, and public theater. And much like today, most people were winging it. Suddenly you're handed a folded scrap of parchment. It's blank. You look up in confusion, but the messenger just winks and disappears. Later, under lamplight, faint letters begin to appear, heat-activated ink made from pomegranate and wine. The message reads, you watched all day, you smiled twice. Say something next time. You're not sure who wrote it, but it makes you smile again. You tuck it into your sleeve and rise from the wall. Around you, the flirtations continue, clumsy, brave, bizarre. You pass someone practicing lines aloud like the curve of a dolphin. No, wait. Maybe that's the truth of it. Love in any language is more stumble than sonnet, more trying than triumph. And even in Doric Greek, even with metaphorical dolphins, what really matters is the effort. Women's schools and secret diaries. You've spent most of your time trailing the boys, the philosophers, the apothecaries, the athletes, but now finally you slip behind a less-traveled marble arch up a quiet path and into a small, vine-draped villa near the edge of town. Here the voices are lighter, quicker, full of hushed laughter and sharp silences. The space smells like pressed lavender, sun-warmed ink, and the faintest trace of beeswax polish. You've entered the domain of the women. This is no symposium, no gymnasium. It's a thyasos, a semi-private gathering of women led by a matron or priestess, devoted to education, ritual, and mutual protection. There's weaving, yes, and hymn singing, and maybe a bit of gossip over dates and almonds, but also something else. Something private, something paper-thin and whisper-fragile. Scrolls. Not public ones, not declared or debated like those of Plato or Hesiod. These are tucked away in clay jars, hidden under floorboards or folded into the linings of embroidered cloaks. Diaries, maybe, or lessons or dreams. Mainstream fact. Though ancient Greek women were often excluded from formal education, especially in Athens, evidence suggests that women of wealth or in specific cultic or regional contexts received instruction in music, dance, poetry, and even philosophical thought. Places like Lesbos and Sparta offered more freedom, and figures like Sappho priestesses and female oracles preserved a quieter kind of intellectual lineage. You're welcomed wordlessly by a woman in her 30s with eyes like sharpened bronze. She gestures for you to sit, then resumes copying something onto a wax tablet. Over her shoulder, you catch glimpses of phrases. Touch is not always seen. Honey burns slower than oil. Ask only the moon what cannot be spoken. Across the room, two girls barely in their teens practice singing a hymn to Aphrodite. Their hands clasp, their voices soft but confident. You're not sure whether it's a religious rite or just an excuse to harmonize. Either way, they keep exchanging glances between verses. You know that look. A group in the corner debates flower pairings for a festival crown. Roses, one insists. Too obvious, another counters. Dittany, someone whispers. They all pause, then nod solemnly. Dittany, after all, was thought to bring luck in matters of love, especially love that needed hiding. Fringe tidbit. In a fragment of what may be a domestic spellbook, scholars found the recipe for an ink of silence made from crushed iris petals and rainwater collected from the shadow of a married woman's house. It was meant to write letters that disappeared after reading. The spell ends with the phrase, "Only the heart keeps it." Historians still argue whether these gatherings were social, religious, or revolutionary. Were they simply about weaving and worship, or something deeper, mutual education, protection, subversion? Some suspect they were spaces where women could record stories forbidden to public scrolls, desires, warnings, methods of resistance, and seduction. Someone hands you a folded piece of papyrus light as breath. On it, a sketch, two figures side by side, not touching, but close enough to suggest it. Below them, just one line. We were quiet, but not still. You look up. No one claims it. A soft giggle somewhere behind a curtain. A woman nearby is teaching another how to blend herbs, lemon balm, mint, crushed laurel. Not for medicine, she clarifies. For scent, for the wrist. For when you want to be remembered. Another offers advice for correspondence. Never start a letter with "I dreamed of you" unless you're certain. Otherwise, just say you liked the plum they gave you. Let them guess the rest. The air is full of codes. Everything here is layered, cloaked in meaning. A scarf tied left over right means wait for me. A sandal hung from a peg with the laces knotted means don't wait. A cracked piece of mirror buried beneath the fig tree, I'm already gone. You try not to romanticize it too much. These women aren't fantasy figures or mystics. They're people. Clever, sharp, practical. They know the risks of affection. They know what it costs to say too much. But still they write, they teach, they pass their diagrams hand to hand in secret. You find a worn wax tablet tucked under a woven cushion. It's been pressed again and again, the lines overlapping like nervous thoughts. But you manage to make out 3 ways to say I want you. Offer tea and forget the sugar. Laugh before the story ends. Brush lint from their sleeve even if there is none. You think back to the scrolls of stick figures and oiled wrestlers. This feels more accurate. You're invited to sit at a low table where women are threading beads onto linen cords. Each color means something: amber for honesty, lapis for longing, green glass for safe return. One girl knots hers twice, then pauses, whispers something to the woman beside her. They both nod. The knot stays. Outside the day fades. The light through the lattice windows turns golden, then honeyed, then slow and amber like melted time. Someone lights a lamp and begins to hum. Someone else braids a sister's hair. You sit quietly and watch a world unfold, one not built on declarations but on gestures, looks, codes. And in the margins of a scroll tucked into the bottom of a storage jar, you catch one last scribbled line. Barely legible, a voice long past saying, "No one taught us. We taught each other, with our hands." You fold it carefully, return it to its place, and you leave the thiosos lighter than you arrived, carrying no scroll, no grand lesson, just the echo of a secret rhythm. A reminder that the truest guides are sometimes the quietest ones. Sympathetic magic and bedroom gods. The air is thicker here, more incense than breeze. You followed a winding staircase into a small courtyard just off the agora, where terracotta rooftops press close, and every surface seems covered in ash, soot, or secrets. You hear the tinkling of bells, and the occasional faint chant that sounds like someone arguing politely with the underworld. You've entered the realm of love magic, not the dreamy, sandal-throwing, fig-blushing kind. No, this is the practical, gritty magic of wax dolls and whispered curses. Here, under cover of dusk, love becomes a game of ritual, risk, and tiny, slightly creepy figurines. Mainstream historical fact. The Greeks practiced a form of magic known as sympathia, the belief that symbolic actions could influence distant people or events. It wasn't just fringe behavior either. Scholars, housewives, soldiers, anyone might engage in these rites, especially when it came to Eros, which refused to follow logic and instead demanded wax string and hope. You're met by a woman who identifies herself only as the aunt. She's not your aunt. She's everyone's aunt. Her fingers are stained with charcoal and pomegranate, and she doesn't so much speak as mutter in proverbs. She waves you inside a small, shaded chamber that smells of burnt cloves and leftover vinegar. The altar in the corner is crowded Aphrodite, of course, seated in elegant stone, but also Hecate looking vaguely judgmental and a smaller horned figure labeled Eros armed. Apparently he means business. Fringe tidbit. One surviving spell from an ancient Greek defixio tablet requests Eros to bind a lover's limbs so they cannot eat, cannot sleep, cannot see others with desire until they return to the caster. It's not romantic. It's uncomfortably specific. The line, "Let her thoughts be thorns until I am hers," is especially intense. But then again, heartbreak tends to be dramatic. You watch as the aunt assembles a charm. First, she molds two tiny figures from wax, one for the lover, one for the object of desire. You can tell which is which, she explains, by who's reaching and who's turning away. She wraps them gently in red string, not unlike a Christmas ornament, then places them on a small wooden dish surrounded by dried thyme and honeyed barley. This, she says, is a soft binding. It draws like warmth, not force. You nod slowly, pretending this all makes perfect sense. She lifts a second dish, this one lined with iron nails and what appears to be a frog's foot. This, she continues, is for enemies, or if they've been unfaithful, not recommended unless the moon agrees with your fury. She laughs. You do too, a little nervously. Historians still argue whether these love spells were widely accepted religious practices, expressions of desperation, or borderline criminal behavior. Some view them as part of domestic cultic life rituals to gods like Aphrodite and Eros. Others point to the darker underground world of magoi, wandering magicians, and charm sellers who offered quick fixes and permanent regrets. You notice a bronze mirror on the altar cracked but polished. The aunt catches your gaze. You want to see their face? She asks. You blink. Whoever you're thinking about. You weren't. Or maybe you were. She holds up the mirror anyway. You stare at your reflection. Behind it, faint shadows, candlelight. Nothing magical, nothing concrete, but still a flutter. Elsewhere in the room are miniature beds clay carved about the size of a small turtle. They're Klein-shaped little versions of the reclining couches used at banquets. On each is a couple molded in relief mid-embrace. Some are tender, others are anatomically ambitious. These are votives offerings to Aphrodite left at her sanctuaries by hopeful lovers newlyweds or very bold worshippers. You run a finger over one its edges smooth from centuries of prayers. Someone once begged a goddess with this. You try to imagine what they said. One tiny bed is empty. You ask about it. The aunt smiles. That's the wish. You fill it later. You glance down and realize that even here among spells and wax and muttered curses, there's still space for longing, for humor, for desire that's unfulfilled but hopeful. Maybe especially then. On the way out, you pass a wall of hanging tokens. Bits of fabric, beads, tiny bronze animals. Each is a plea, a promise, a polite bribe to the divine. One tag reads, "May he return sober and love me like he meant to." Another, "Let her forget that I tripped on the stairs and said the wrong name." And another, simply, "Let it be enough." You exhale. This isn't the clean, idealized love from symposia or scrolls. It's messier, clumsier, maybe more real. You step out into the night. Behind you, the aunt hums and begins another charm. Above, the stars blink slowly into being like scattered embers from a forgotten altar. You reach into your pouch and find a small wax token. It's been slipped there probably by the aunt. It's a tiny clay foot engraved with a single word, "Stay." You don't know who it's for, but you keep it. The marketplace of love advice. Morning comes with the usual chorus roosters arguing at different pitch levels, pots clanking and merchants yelling at pigeons like it's a full-time job. You wind through Athens's bustling agora, stepping carefully to avoid both the philosophical debates and the occasional runaway fig cart. Here, the pulse of the city beats loudest. And if you know where to listen between the olive vendors and the sandal repair booths, you'll find more than fresh fish and waxed scrolls. You'll find the unofficial experts, the unsolicited advice givers, the loudest and perhaps least qualified love consultants in history. You start with a man leaning on a staff made of fig wood, his beard shaped like a soft triangle and his robes 2 sizes too big. "You're seeking counsel," he says, eyeing you up and down like a goat he's about to appraise. "I've seen 87 springs. I've loved through 63. I know 14 kinds of heartbreak and 3 effective ways to get over them." You nod politely. He continues without waiting. "First, take her sandal, just one. If she chases you, she cares. If she doesn't, you're better off." You blink. Mainstream fact. Ancient Greece didn't have agony ants, but it did have public poets, satirists, and street performers who doubled as informal counselors. The agora was a place where news and advice passed like olives through fingers. You could buy a papyrus of love poems, get your fortune told, and argue about the proper temperature for wine all before breakfast. The man goes on. "Second, never trust a woman whose dog doesn't like you. A woman at the next stall snorts, or a man who writes poems about his own abs. There's a lively burst of laughter. You move on. A young vendor selling braided cords waves you over. Want to know what she's thinking, he says, holding up a length of knotted rope. This tells you. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Every woman knots her sandals differently. Single wrap bold, double cross cautious, loop tucked under the ankle. She's hoping you'll notice. Fringe tidbit. Some sources suggest that certain fashion choices in the ancient world did signal relationship status, especially in festivals. A red sash might mean spoken for, while an open tunic or a certain hairstyle could indicate flirtation. One odd fragment even claims that a woman's earring shape could reveal her favorite poet. Aphrodite help the man who guessed wrong. Nearby, a pair of old women sell rosewater and eyeshadow. They've arranged their booth like a goddess's vanity table with hand mirrors, small pots of pigment, and carved combs. You want to impress one, says, handing you a smooth seashell. Say her hair reminds you of waves, but not stormy ones. Gentle ones. Nobody wants to be compared to Poseidon's wrath. Her partner chimes in, and never say skin like marble. That's cold and dead. Say like sunlight on fresh milk. You wonder how many of these lines have ever actually worked. A small boy walks past with a sign advertising lessons in seduction by the minute. You follow him to a corner where a poet slightly drunk, definitely underemployed, is offering improvised love songs for 2 obols a verse. You pay. He blinks twice, hums, and begins, "O listener whose ears are fine, may love's sweet fingers intertwine with yours unless you're taken. Then I'll write this song for someone when you're free again." You tip him extra for the effort. Historians still argue whether this kind of public performance was taken seriously or just dismissed as street theater. Some plays portray these figures as wise fools channeling sacred truth by accident. Others treat them as cautionary tales too, in Love with Love, to be useful to anyone. Either way, people listened and remembered. A woman in a cloak sells ribbons embroidered with tiny stitched symbols, each one a coded message. This means, "I see you," she explains. This means, "Wait until the festival." This one says, "My mother's watching." You buy too. You don't ask what they say. Just when you think you've heard it all, a hunched man beckons from under an awning. "Want the real secret?" he rasps. You nod. He leans in. Leave something behind. Not something expensive, just personal. A beat note, a half-eaten fig. Something they'll find and wonder, why this, why here? That wondering will keep you close. Then he stands up, wanders away, and begins yelling about barley prices. The spell is broken, but the idea lingers. You find a small bench and sit, letting the agora swirl around you. Kids chasing each other with laurel branches. A man trying to balance an amphora on his head. A woman scolding a rooster for reasons unknown. You reach into your bag and pull out a ribbon gently embroidered. A stitched eye, a tiny star. You don't know what it means, but you imagine someone seeing it, holding it, smiling. The marketplace may be full of noise of false starts and questionable sandal theories. But buried in the chaos, there's something else, truth shaped like nonsense. Affection disguised as performance. The kind of advice you don't follow exactly, but carry with you anyway, folded up like a note tucked into your belt. You leave the agora just as the sun dips low and the sky turns to clay-colored gold. A man passes you reciting lines to himself. Say she is as steady as a temple. No say she builds temples. No say he groans and walks into a pillar. You pat his shoulder as you pass. Try the fig line you suggest. People like figs, the infamous diagrams of Philanus. You've heard the whispers. Everyone has. From the symposium cushions to the marketplace stalls, the name Philanus slips through the air like steam from a bathhouse, always a little scandalous, always softened with a smirk. No one agrees on who she was, but everyone agrees on what she did. She wrote the manual, the one you weren't supposed to read, but absolutely did. And now here you are facing a scorched, soft-edged scroll wrapped in goatskin and hidden inside a hollowed-out vase marked grain. A not-so-subtle decoy. The old man who sold it to you insists it's authentic. She was ahead of her time, he wheezes, and behind most of Athens. You smile, then open it. The ink is faded, the edges curled from heat, either fire or the Mediterranean sun. But the diagrams? Oh, they're there. Dozens of them. Stark, hand-drawn, and unapologetically enthusiastic. Mainstream historical note: Philanus of Samos is a real name found in ancient texts, often associated with a lost manual of lovemaking. Whether she truly authored it or whether the name was pseudonymous, satirical, or completely fabricated remains a matter of scholarly debate. References to her appear in both approving and mocking tones throughout Greek and Roman sources. The scroll begins not with a preface, but with a drawing of two people reclining on a couch surrounded by floating arrows and notations. One phrase in Ionic script reads, "If tired, attempt this in parts." You blink. The diagrams that follow range from the gently instructional to the comically ambitious. Some are accompanied by numbered steps. Others have short notes like, "Do not attempt on uneven floors," or "requires trust and olive oil." You pause at a drawing where both participants appear to be balancing on amphorae. This one's labeled Festival of Dionysus Optional. Fringe tidbit. A few ancient Roman texts quote from something they attribute to Philanus, including lines about the measured turn, the mirror glance, and the downward gaze as prelude. Some scholars believe these weren't actual physical instructions, but metaphors or euphemisms dressed up as advice. Others think they're very real moves with extremely poetic names. The truth? Probably both. You flip to a section titled Pillow Tactics. This includes diagrams using props, cushions, cloaks, possibly a lyre, though it's unclear if it's functional or just for show. Each drawing is annotated with emotional cues, surprise laughter pause here. It's surprisingly tender. At one point, there's a detailed sketch of fingers arranged like dancers on a stage, followed by the phrase, "Touch is a language." Use complete sentences. That one makes you stop. Just sit with it. You're so used to the philosophers and their firecracker metaphors, the smug symposium speakers with their odes and oiled chariots. But this feels like someone actually trying to help. Historians still argue whether the manual attributed to Philanus was serious or satirical. One camp claims it was an educational tool for Hetairai high-status courtesans used to train new initiates. Others say it was parody, a ribald commentary poking fun at over-intellectualized eros. Some even claim Philanus was a fictional creation by male writers to imagine the ideal woman who both taught and obeyed. You look down again at the drawings. If this is parody, it's awfully earnest. One section near the bottom is badly damaged. You can barely make out the lines, but the remaining note reads, If all else fails, try laughter. Try again tomorrow. Try the gentle version. No sarcasm, no sly wink, just that. You wonder who read this centuries ago, who copied it, who whispered about it behind market stalls or studied it in moonlight before a festival. You imagine two lovers unfolding the scroll, nervously giggling over the diagrams, disagreeing about what counts as gentle. Then trying anyway. And yes, there's a diagram that includes what appears to be a lute, a goat, and three arrows pointing in contradictory directions. That one's just labeled advanced. Avoid indoors. You chuckle, then carefully rewrap the scroll and slide it back into its goatskin sleeve. It's not every day you handle something that history tried to erase with equal parts fire and ridicule. One last note etched faintly along the edge in almost invisible ink catches your eye. To those who read this and blush, the body is wise, the mind will catch up. You carry that with you as you leave. Outside the city thrums with ordinary life fishmongers, students, farmers dragging sacks that leak barley with every step. But you feel changed, not scandalized, not instructed, just reminded that someone somewhere once cared enough to draw the possibilities, to give the blushing, the curious, the brave, and the baffled something to work with. Even if it involved goats and balance, you take a deep breath. The scent of olive smoke lingers in your robe. You touch the edge of the scroll one last time through the fabric. Then move on. And just like that, Philanus becomes part of you, inked not only on wax and parchment, but in the quiet confidence of knowing this was always more than technique. It was an art, with diagrams. Hesiod's bad dating advice. You've made your way back to the main avenue where olive sellers argue over prices and goats seem to have very specific opinions about where they're willing to walk. A gentle breeze carries the scent of oregano, and from somewhere nearby comes the metallic clink of a lyre being very gently abused by someone who's probably not qualified. You hear a voice, gravelly, slightly nasal, declaring, "And thus a good woman is rarer than a flawless mule." Oh no, you found Hesiod. Well, not the man himself, he's long dead and probably still complaining about it. But his words live on, quoted by an old scribe perched on a stool surrounded by dusty scrolls and an even dustier audience. You settle in near the back and catch the eye of another listener who gives you the universal brace yourself nod. Mainstream fact: Hesiod, an early Greek poet of the 7th or 8th century BCE, authored Works and Days, a didactic poem that covers everything from farming tips to moral behavior to, unfortunately, gender relations. His most infamous passages advise men to marry at the right time, 30 of course, and warn against women as a beautiful evil created by the gods to torment mankind. He literally blames Pandora, the first woman, for letting trouble into the world. Cheerful fellow. The scribe reads on, "Do not let a woman deceive you with her wiles, for her mind is coiled like a snake in sunlight." A nearby grandmother snorts and mutters his mind was probably coiled. You like her immediately. The scroll continues. Now he's advising what kind of wife to marry: someone young enough to mold, quiet enough to avoid arguments, and preferably not related to your neighbors because that's socially risky. He does not mention love, or affection, or whether the woman wants any part in this plan. Fringe tidbit. Some ancient sources suggest Hesiod may have had a bad romantic experience, a lawsuit or inheritance dispute that colored his worldview permanently. One dramatic theory proposes he was swindled by a lover, or maybe just got ghosted. Regardless, his poetry is full of caution, suspicion, and metaphors involving livestock. Historians still argue whether Works and Days was meant to be practical instruction, moral allegory, or just very early mansplaining. Some read it as genuine advice for a rough agrarian life where marrying poorly could literally ruin your crop yield. Others see it as proto-satire exaggerated for effect. Most agree Hesiod was not the go-to guy for tender insights into the heart. The scribe folds up the scroll and asks for thoughts. One young man says seems like he needed a hug. A woman adds, or a vacation. Another quietly says, or a better mule. You wander over to the table where used scrolls are being sold. There's a copy of Hesiod's greatest hits bundled with a pamphlet titled Better Wives Through Obedience. You hold it up. The merchant grimaces. Honestly, that one's for historical curiosity or firewood. You ask if he has anything with a softer touch. He rummages through a bin, then pulls out a faded scrap attributed to an unknown female poet. No diagrams, no declarations, just, if she gives you an apple, take it. If she gives you two, ask which she kept. If she gives you none, offer your hand anyway. You take it. As you walk through the winding streets, you spot Hesiod's influence in odd places, graffiti quoting him on garden walls, mostly sarcastic. One says better a mule than a wife unless the wife owns the mule. Someone's added a little drawing of a smug donkey. You pass a group of teenagers quoting Hesiod badly to each other. Do not bathe with women for the water turns. One kid squints. Turns what? Another shrugs. Probably emotional. They all laugh. At a fountain, a man recites Hesiod as a dare. If a man weds, he does so blindly. Then he promptly walks into a post. And still, despite his dour tone, Hesiod remains quoted, debated scratched onto amphorae and tucked into cautionary plays. There's something strangely comforting about how bad his advice was, about how he tried to reduce love into equations and age brackets, and about how people have been mocking him for centuries. Because even back then, people knew love doesn't follow rules. It spills over charts, laughs at checklists, and absolutely ignores your 30-year marriage plan if the right person hands you a pomegranate at the wrong time. As you return to the quieter side streets, you tuck the apple poem into your sleeve. You pass a statue of a woman cloaked serene anonymous. Someone's hung a garland around her neck, and beside her a scrap of graffiti written in faded ink. Hesiod said to fear her. I said ask her name. Debates in the shade of Aphrodite's temple. You find yourself wandering uphill now, the bustle of the city softening into birdsong and cicada chatter. The cobblestones are warm beneath your sandals, worn smooth by centuries of slow steps and heavy thoughts. Cypress trees sway gently overhead. You pass shrines tucked into niches, each one holding offerings of honey cakes, ribbons, pomegranate halves, and occasionally a very confused cat. At the crest of the hill sits the temple of Aphrodite, not the grand version from Corinth with its famously interpretive priestesses, but a more modest Athenian branch. The goddess still reigns, but here she's a bit more relaxed. Less chariots and doves, more footpaths and figs. The air is thick with incense and friendly argument. You've arrived just in time for the daily debate. Locals, priests, poets, even the occasional stray philosopher come to sit beneath the temple portico and disagree politely about love. Today's question is desire a divine blessing or a human disorder? Mainstream fact Aphrodite wasn't just the goddess of romantic love, she embodied all forms of attraction, fertility, beauty, and yes, passion that could tip into chaos. In different regions, she took on local flavors. In Athens, she was a civic presence more about bonds and harmony. In Cyprus, she was elemental. In Sparta, she even had a warrior form. The debates about her were just as varied. The first speaker, a white-robed priest with excellent eyebrows, says desire is sacred, a gift from the gods to remind mortals of their divine origins. When we feel longing, he says, we remember we are not beasts but beings shaped by beauty. There's a smattering of applause. A pigeon poops nearby. Omen unclear. A woman stands. She wears the red sash of a temple attendant and carries herself like someone who's seen some things. Desire is sacred, she says, but not always convenient. It can ruin marriages, start wars, and make grown men cry over sandals. We should honor it, but not obey it blindly. A poet snorts and mutters, spoken like someone who's never written a tragic ode. She shoots him a look. He wilts. Fringe tidbit. Some votive offerings to Aphrodite included tiny tablets inscribed with lovers' names, fragments of hair, or in one famous case, a sculpture of a heart being chased by a snake labeled Her Hesitations. One recovered plaque reads, Aphrodite, grant me peace or clarity. Either will do. Historians still argue whether these rituals were acts of true worship or psychological relief valves, ways for people to navigate turbulent emotions using the familiar framework of divine bureaucracy. You don't pray to stop loving someone. You ask the goddess to negotiate on your behalf. Back under the temple's shade, the debate continues. Someone poses a new question. If Aphrodite favors beauty, what happens to those who are plain? A younger voice answers. Then she favors voice or scent or cleverness or hands that can weave something lasting. He shrugs. She has more than one eye. Another speaker challenges the myth of Aphrodite's impartiality. She meddles, he says. Paris picked her gift, and look what happened, 10 years of war and a horse full of regret. There's laughter. Someone tries to pivot the discussion toward whether lust and love are the same god in different togas. It spirals quickly. You lean back against a warm stone pillar and just listen. Some people quote poetry, others quote past lovers. One woman says her worst heartbreak happened during a lunar eclipse, and that it was clearly divine punishment for ignoring a dream. Someone else claims dreams don't count unless they come with figs. A priestess gently brings the group back on track. The goddess, she says, does not punish us for desire. She simply opens the door. We are the ones who stumble through it. That quiets things. For a moment, everyone looks at the temple's great wooden door which stands open. Incense trailing out like memory. You get up and wander the grounds. In the temple garden, you find dozens of tokens hanging from an old olive tree. Bits of ribbon earrings, even a sandal with a love poem scrawled on the sole. One ribbon has only a name, another reads, Forgive me even if you never do. You spot a small stone bench recently added with an inscription carved in loving, slightly crooked Greek. If I sit here long enough, may she find me, or may I forget her, whichever hurts less. You sit. The stone is warm from the sun and worn from countless moments like this one. From the hilltop, you see Athens in soft light, its temples and streets, its daily rhythm of longing and logic. Down there, people are buying bread, making deals, spilling wine, saying the wrong thing, or maybe the right thing at the wrong time. And here on the hill, they're still trying to define what can't be defined. Love, after all, is both divine blessing and disorder. Aphrodite wouldn't have it any other way. You leave a sprig of thyme by the temple gate. You're not sure why? Maybe as thanks. Maybe just in case the goddess is listening and likes herbal arrangements. As you descend the hill, you carry the scent of incense with you, and the memory of a debate that didn't solve anything but somehow made you feel understood anyway. The Spartan Pillow Talk Chronicles. You've followed the road south now, away from the sun-glazed chatter of Athens, to a place where the mountains rise like unsmiling judges, and everything smells faintly of leather, pine, and ambition. Welcome to Sparta. You don't stroll into Sparta, you arrive like you're reporting for duty. There's less poetry here, more purpose. Even the fig trees look disciplined. And unlike Athens, where love is all wine metaphors and symposium flirtation, Sparta has its own unique approach to intimacy. Less whisper, more wrestling match. Mainstream fact Spartan culture was famously austere, focused on military training discipline and loyalty to the state. From age 7, boys were sent to the agoge, a rigorous educational and physical program. And yet, paradoxically, Sparta gave women far more freedom than most other Greek city-states. Spartan women were educated, physically trained, and even owned land. And when it came to love and relationships, let's just say they weren't shy. You arrive in the middle of what appears to be a couple's combat exercise. Two figures spar in a sandy courtyard, one tall and muscular, the other shorter but faster, both in tunics hitched up for movement, both circling like cats with knives. You're about to assume it's a training drill when the taller one lunges and kisses the other mid-grapple. Ah, that kind of practice. A nearby elder chuckles. That's foreplay, he says. We believe in testing each other's strength before sharing a bed. Builds trust and bruises. You quickly take a seat. You're not sure if this is terrifying or oddly romantic. Possibly both. Fringe tidbit. According to some accounts, Spartan newlyweds didn't even live together at first. Brides were often dressed as men, haircut short clothes in disguise, and waited in darkened rooms for their husbands to sneak in under cover of night. These rituals may have roots in ancient rites of passage or attempts to ease young men trained entirely among other males into heterosexual marriage. Either way, the vibe is very romantic ambush. You're invited into a home to observe purely as a guest, of course. The space is modest, stone-walled, and smoky, with a hearth and a low wooden bed. On one side, a rack of spears, on the other, a basket of herbs and a half-finished poem. Yes, even Spartans wrote poems. You didn't expect that. The couple you observed earlier sit beside you now, still slightly winded from their flirt fight. They explain that in Sparta, attraction isn't about softness. It's about admiration, challenge, equal footing. You can't love someone, the woman says, if you don't respect their strength. Her partner nods. If you can't hold your own in a foot race, don't expect me to hold your heart. You're not sure that would fly at an Athenian symposium, but here it rings true. Historians still argue whether Spartan marriages were as coldly practical as the military culture suggests, or whether behind the state-mandated rigor was a deeply passionate, if unconventional, approach to intimacy. The preserved fragments of Spartan poetry, especially those by Alcman, hint at longing, admiration, and emotional complexity beneath the armor. You're shown a scroll from one such poet. It reads, "She shines like dawn in iron sandals. I race not to outrun her, but to see her smile when I fail." Okay, you admit it. That's kind of beautiful. You're offered a bowl of broth. It's black. You try not to ask what's in it. Someone says it's a test of character. You sip. It's character building. After dinner, the couple demonstrates Spartan pillow talk, which mostly consists of blunt observations. You smelled better after the last raid. Your leg sweep is lazy. I sharpened your blade. You're welcome. And then quietly, I thought of you when I saw the mountain laurel bloom. There's a pause. That one lands a little differently. They don't hold hands exactly, but they sit with knees touching. There's no need for flourish, no need to perform romance. It just is. Later, you visit a shrine to Aphrodite Aurea, warlike Aphrodite. Here, she's not draped in roses or lounging on a couch. She's upright, armored, standing guard over a small altar where lovers leave tokens of respect and strength. One offering is a ring made from bent arrowhead. Another a braided bracelet of horsehair and olive fiber. You ask a local why Aphrodite needs a spear. Because love can be a battle, she says. Not against each other, but beside each other. As the night deepens, you walk through quiet streets where the sounds of sparring have faded into hushed conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. You pass one home where shadows dance behind the thin curtain. Two figures mimicking swordplay, pausing now and then to embrace. Spartan love isn't about candlelight or perfume. It's about grit, precision, endurance. And somewhere in there, affection carved like marble, unmoving, unembellished, unbreakable. You lie down that night on a firm mat, your muscles sore from nothing in particular. Your mind buzzing with the idea that maybe passion doesn't always have to be soft. Sometimes it wears sandals made for running and eyes that dare you to keep up. And just before sleep takes you, you remember the words scratched into the back of a Spartan shield you passed earlier. To love is to stand. Not before, not behind, but with. Scrolls, sculptures, and mixed signals. You return north, sand still clinging to your hem from Spartan soil, and now you're wandering the shaded galleries of a quiet Athenian estate, the kind with high ceilings, cool floors, and marble busts that seem to be silently judging your fashion choices. Here, art is everywhere, lining the walls, nestled in alcoves, etched onto vases, and it's all trying to tell you something about love, sort of. The first sculpture you see is a modest affair, a slender man offering a bunch of grapes to a woman who's clearly looking in the opposite direction. It's labeled The Offering of Eryximachus. A placard nearby claims this was a romantic gesture, but honestly, it looks like she's trying to dodge a social obligation. Mainstream fact. Ancient Greek sculpture, pottery, and visual art were saturated with depictions of love and desire ranging from mythological seductions to intimate domestic scenes. But interpreting those images isn't always straightforward. The Greeks loved symbolism, and they rarely labeled things with helpful captions like, "He's proposing here." Most of the time, you're left squinting at the angle of a wrist and wondering if someone's being flirted with or attacked by a swan. You pass a set of erotic vase paintings, black figure, intricate, suggestive, without being well too anatomically ambitious. One scene shows a man reaching toward a reclining woman. There's a bird in the background, possibly a goose. Possibly a metaphor. You whisper to yourself, is the goose involved? A museum attendant drifts over and says, ah, that's the goose of Peitho, the goddess of persuasion. Probably symbolic. Probably. You nod, you're not convinced. Fringe tidbit. Some scholars have argued that erotic art in ancient Greece wasn't necessarily meant to arouse, but to entertain or even to teach. But others suggest it was used ritualistically or as private devotional material. There's even speculation that some households used painted pottery the way we use romantic comedies for company fantasy, and the occasional uncomfortable dinner guest. You stop before a bust of a woman. Her expression is unreadable. Her eyes are carved to look slightly down and to the left as though she's seen your scrolls and is unimpressed. A nearby inscription reads, "She declined love not with scorn, but with patience." You wonder how many lovers walked away from that face without ever knowing what it meant. Historians still argue whether certain postures and expressions in sculpture carried standardized romantic meanings, or whether we're projecting our modern body language back onto statues that were really just modeled after the artist's neighbor. That slightly pursed mouth could be flirtation, could be gas. You move on to the scrolls. In a side chamber, a scholar with far too many bookmarks is poring over love poetry. Short, fragmentary lines copied over generations. He lets you look. One verse reads, "She touched her hair and the room leaned." Another, "He said nothing and it filled the air like time." You blink. These aren't instructional, they're emotional landmines. You ask if he's ever seen a scroll with clear romantic advice like bullet points, maybe even diagrams. He sighs. Philinus tried, he says. But mostly the Greeks didn't write instruction manuals, they wrote metaphors, and hoped we'd figure it out. He gestures to a passage scribbled in the margin of an unrelated farming scroll. You read, "To win her, don't ask her. Find the flower she steps over. Bring her that one." You think about the man in the agora who suggested sandal theft. This feels more practical and less illegal. You return to the sculpture gallery and notice something new. Along the base of a statue of Eros, winged mid-flight bow raised, someone has etched a modern note. Just a scratch in the marble, shallow and hidden. It says, "Does he ever miss?" Good question. You walk through a room of statues, frozen in mid-reach, hands, extended fingers, curled eyes, lifted toward what must once have been something more. Most are incomplete. Some missing arms, others chipped faces. One has only its base, the figure long since lost. Yet the name remains to the one who made me turn around. You sit beside that pedestal for a while. There's something comforting about how uncertain it all is. Love in ancient Greece wasn't a neatly labeled concept. It was a swirl of gestures offering symbolic animals, mistaken poetry, and art that might have been instruction, or might have been someone's daydream in fired clay. You pass a vase on your way out. It shows two women seated across from each other, one holding a spindle, the other a flute. No title, no explanation. Just a quiet moment preserved forever in profile. You lean closer and see a faint scratch beneath the glaze. "She played for me once. I still hear it." That's the real language of love mixed signals. Soft memory things half said and deeply felt. You leave the gallery lighter. Not because you've decoded any great secret, but because you've been reminded that love has always been an incomplete sentence. A sculpture missing one hand, a drawing with no arrows, a metaphor with too many birds. But still we try. And sometimes that's enough. Dinner parties and love games. Night again and Athens glows like spilled wine across the hills. Golden windows, candlelit terraces, the occasional echo of laughter where the olive groves thin into shadow. You're following a trail of perfume and lyre music to a private courtyard tucked behind a columned villa. You've been invited to a dinner party, though not just any dinner party. This is an epidipnon, where the wine flows, the food impresses, and at some point someone will start reciting poetry with more feeling than accuracy. And yes, love games are on the menu. The host greets you at the gate with a theatrical bow. Tonight, he says, we drink, we speak, and we remember just how ridiculous desire can be. He ushers you in past a statue of Dionysus holding a fig and winking, which feels excessive, and into a courtyard lined with low couches and curious guests reclining in practiced angles of aloofness. Mainstream fact. While the symposium was a male-dominated drinking party, the epidipnon was its cousin, slightly more relaxed, often mixed gender and full of performances, storytelling, and social sparring. These weren't just about food, they were status rituals arenas of wit, and surprisingly rich with games that danced just shy of courtship. You recline with a cup of diluted wine, always diluted because even at a flirtation-heavy event, no one wants to pass out before the poetry starts. Tonight's first game is kotabos. The host explains, you fling the dregs of your wine across the courtyard at a target, usually a small saucer or a figurine balanced on a stand. But you must name the person you desire while you throw. If it hits, they're destined to love you back. You're handed a cup and directed toward a badly painted bust of Aphrodite. Someone else's wine has already splattered across her chin like a makeup experiment gone rogue. You make your toss. It lands with a pathetic plop in the grass. Someone says tragic, but at least honest. Fringe tidbit. In some accounts, guests took kotabos so seriously that they trained their wrists beforehand. One historian even insists that a famed beauty once rejected a suitor solely because he missed the target 3 times in a row. How can he aim for my heart, she allegedly said, if he can't even hit a saucer? Next up, the love riddle round. Guests must pose questions about love in the form of riddles, the answers to which must be metaphorical, flattering, and slightly suggestive. A woman in emerald says, what touches without hands leaves a mark without pain and grows heavier the more you ignore it. Someone answers guilt. She smirks. Close. I meant longing. But let's call it a draw. You're asked to contribute. You clear your throat and say, I hide in glances, I flee in silence, I bloom between footsteps. What am I? The host claps. Desire or indigestion, both acceptable. The next game is ancient charades. No words, just gestures, but all based on myths of love. You watch someone act out pan-chasing syrinx complete with frantic flute playing and a deeply uncomfortable tree impression. Another group attempts Orpheus and Eurydice, but someone forgets which one is supposed to die and it turns into interpretive dance. Historians still argue whether these love games were playful education flirtation rituals or just excuses to touch each other's knees under the table. There's evidence in vase art of people playing similar games, like one in which guests must pass a fig using only their elbows. It rarely ends well for the fig. A server brings you a plate of roasted chickpeas and honeyed dates. The woman beside you leans in and whispers, if someone shares their last date with you, marry them. You look down. You have 2 dates. You give her one. She eats it slowly, watching you over the rim of her cup. You're not sure what that means, but your ears get warm anyway. Later, the host calls for Scolia drinking songs. But tonight, there's a twist. Each guest must improvise a verse about someone in the room and deliver it without naming them. Someone sings, your voice woke the fig tree even though it wasn't spring. I'd give you my sandals if you promised not to run. The room hums with a collective ooh. The subject of the verse turns pink and knocks over her wine. A win by all standards. Your turn. You hesitate, then speak. You don't look like a statue, but I still stared too long. Your laugh's a better sculpture. The host actually gasps. Someone mutters, I should have gone with a metaphor. The final event of the night is a whisper game. One person begins a sentence about love and passes it ear to ear. The last person must shout what they heard. Tonight's phrase begins as love is the wine of the soul. By the time it reaches the end, it comes out as a goat once drank my soul. Close enough. The party winds down with gifts. Each guest leaves a token behind something small, secret, meaningful only to the one who finds it. You tuck a tiny sketch beneath your cup, two figures seated on a couch, one reaching the other, leaning slightly closer. No labels, just that. And as you walk into the night full of wine and riddles, you hear one last laugh from the courtyard, bright as a lyre string snapping in a happy key. Maybe love is a game. Or maybe it's how we play everything else awkwardly honestly. And with just enough charm to keep the figs from rolling off the plate. Famous love letters and the ones never sent. The morning after the party arrives like a whispered apology. Soft, pale light slipping between shuttered windows, the scent of wine still faint in your robe. Your head is light, your pockets are empty, and your heart? Well, that's complicated. Today's stroll takes you past the post house, a low building near the agora where messengers gather scrolls are bundled, and pigeons with high self-esteem coo from their terracotta perches. You're not here to send anything. Not yet. You're here to read. Inside the archive is quiet. Scrolls, wax tablets, folded papyrus, some formal, some clumsily creased, tied with twine or a faded ribbon. A scribe nods as you enter. The love letters are over there, he says, pointing past a curtained alcove. Filed by mood. You blink. Mood. He grins. We have bold yearning, wistful. Deeply regretful and absolutely should not be sent, but we're keeping them anyway. You start naturally with yearning. Mainstream fact letter writing was a deeply respected art in ancient Greece and Rome, used by philosophers, lovers, rulers, and even mythological figures, at least in literature. While few personal letters survive from classical Athens, fictional love letters, especially in later periods, were immensely popular. They shaped how love was expressed, imagined, and remembered. You unfurl a scroll from the anonymous pile. It reads, I saw your shadow before I saw your face, and still it softened the morning. Short, unaddressed, never sent. Another more structured begins. Dearest to me. The moon was quiet last night. I waited for your voice in the courtyard, but heard only the fig leaves whispering things I couldn't answer. You don't know who wrote it or when, but you feel like you've waited in that courtyard too. In a corner, a separate collection holds dramatic pieces letters supposedly penned by mythological figures. One is labeled From Medea to Jason Unsent, obviously. It begins, I carved a path through gods for you. You gave me silence. I should have loved the wind instead. You quietly set that one down. Fringe tidbit. A number of erotic letter-writing manuals existed in the Roman period, some of which claim to preserve earlier Greek models. They offered phrases to copy, imagery to borrow, and even templates for apology letters after botched seductions. One particularly cynical text suggests including a compliment about the recipient's handwriting as a way to engage them in continued correspondence. A new letter catches your eye, this one scratched on a wax tablet, the marks worn down as though written and rewritten. You asked what I wanted, I said olives. I meant stay. You sit with that one a while. Historians still argue whether letter writing in ancient Greece was primarily public or personal. Surviving examples tend to be formal military reports, philosophical correspondence. But the few romantic ones that remain, especially in literary fragments, suggest deep emotional range. Love expressed not in grand gestures, but in ink and silence. A scroll tied with a blue cord is marked simply sent, but returned. It begins. You said your garden was empty. I brought seeds. You closed the gate. It ends with a P.S. I left the seeds anyway. You look up. The scribe watches you. People write things they can't say, he murmurs. Then they don't send them. Then they send them anyway. You nod. In the absolutely should not be sent pile, you find an angry note written entirely in metaphors. Your love is like wet sandals, loud and worse the longer it lingers. You are the fig that fell too early. Your laugh is a trick played by hungry gods. Return my scarf. It's signed with a doodle of a goat falling off a cliff. You resist the urge to frame it. Near the window, you discover a slim collection of responses, notes from lovers brave or foolish enough to write back. One reads, I didn't know what to say when you looked at me, so I dropped the pomegranate. I've been trying to say it ever since. Another simply, come by when it rains. We'll pretend the thunder says it for us. You smile, then copy that one onto a fresh scrap for yourself. Before leaving, you notice a single sealed scroll resting on a small pedestal. The tag reads, unread. The scribe sees you looking and says, found it in the ruins, never opened. We decided to keep it that way. You nod, strangely moved. Maybe not everything needs to be read to be understood. You step back into the sun, the word still clinging to your fingertips. You don't have a lover, you don't have a letter. But if you did, you think you'd write something small, something about time blooming in unexpected places, about someone's hand brushing yours in a crowd. You might not send it, but you'd mean every word. The love triangle at the amphitheater. As the sun tips toward afternoon and the stone streets warm your souls with each step, you find yourself drawn toward Athens' open-air heart, the amphitheater. Not the grand one used for state performances, but a smaller, cracked stone venue where masks outnumber seating and nobody checks your ticket. Today there's a play, and not just any play. The myths of love and bad decisions, part tragedy, part comedy, and all ancient soap opera. You slip into a seat halfway up the semicircle. The crowd is still arriving. Merchants wiping their hands on tunics. Young lovers sharing figs and at least one goat that seems more invested in the drama than some of the humans. The actors appear masked and sweeping, launching into a tale as old as the gods, a man, a woman. And someone who definitely wasn't invited, but shows up anyway. Mainstream fact. Ancient Greek theater was a public affair blending entertainment, moral instruction, and cultural commentary. Tragedies explored the limits of fate and personal failure, while comedies tackled politics, daily life, and love, usually with a wink and several wildly inappropriate metaphors. Love triangles were a favorite trope both in myth and stagecraft, and the Greeks mined them for every drop of awkward, aching, delicious tension. The play begins with a declaration. I love her as a flame loves oil, greedy and bright and already dangerous. The audience leans in. Someone drops a fig. Soon we meet the woman, clever, beautiful, and clearly aware she's in a drama. She monologues to the moon about choices, temptation, and the benefits of solitude. Then enters the second man, charming, roguish, late, and armed with a lute he definitely can't play. A classic setup. Fringe tidbit. In a fragment of an ancient comic play, a character tries to resolve a romantic triangle by faking a letter from the gods. He reads it aloud, mispronounces half of it, and ends up proposing to himself. The crowd reportedly cheered. Sometimes even 2000 years ago, everyone just wanted to see a man humbled by love and poor planning. As the play unfolds, the triangle bends, twists, and eventually collapses. The woman doesn't choose either man. Instead, she leaves a note. "Thank you for reminding me I can write my own ending." The audience erupts, half in applause, half in outrage. One older woman stands and yells, "She should have picked the goat!" No one disagrees. You look around. The crowd isn't just watching the play, they're living it. Laughing, sighing, nudging their partners during lines that land a little too closely. A boy near you whispers, "That's you," when the actor recites. You smiled and my plants forgot how to walk. You pretend not to hear, but your cheeks warm. Historians still argue whether these plays reflected real romantic attitudes or were exaggerated morality tales. Some scholars believe the plays held up a mirror to the emotional messiness of public and private life. Others see them as pressure valves, ways for citizens to explore forbidden thoughts from a safe distance disguised by masks and exaggerated gestures. One thing's clear, love triangles were not meant to be resolved neatly. They were meant to show how quickly longing can tangle into regret. A breeze sweeps through the theater as Act 3 begins. A chorus appears, masked dancers weaving between verses, narrating the emotional wreckage in rhymed couplets. They sing of broken promises, mistaken glances, and the quiet cruelty of almost. One chorus member carries a small mirror, turning it toward the audience every few lines. Someone murmurs, "The mirror is for us." You realize you've been watching more than a story. You've been watching everyone else watch it. Seeing their shoulders stiffen, their hands fidget, their eyes glance at people who might not be looking back. There's a line from the play that lingers longer than the rest. No triangle has sharp points until someone draws blood. Ouch! You leave before the final bow, slipping out with the scent of dust and amphora wine still in the air. The sun is low now, shadows lengthening into long theatrical curtains across the marble path. You pass a group reenacting the play with clay puppets. One puppet dramatically throws itself off a stone step and is immediately pecked by a chicken. Art. Just before you turn the corner, you hear a voice behind you say, "If I had a third choice, I'd have taken it." You don't look back. Maybe it was a line from the play, maybe it wasn't. You walk on anyway, thinking about masks, mirrors, and the stories we write just to see who reads them. How not to seduce a philosopher. The day is crisp, the sky annoyingly blue, and you're seated in the shade of a plane tree in a quiet Athenian grove known for two things: bird poop and intellectual overconfidence. This is the kind of spot where students gather cross-legged with their wax tablets, where scholars stare wistfully at geometry problems, and where Socrates probably ruined at least 5 romantic relationships just by asking too many questions. And here you are witnessing a disaster in slow motion. A young woman in a saffron tunic is trying earnestly, valiantly to seduce a philosopher. It's not going well. He's tall, absent-minded nose buried in a scroll about the moral implications of shoe ownership. She brings him grapes. He thanks her. She offers him a clever riddle. He corrects her meter. She touches his elbow. He says, "Oh, I didn't know you were still here." Romance is not dead, it's just deeply confused. Mainstream fact. Ancient Greek philosophers weren't exactly known for their seduction skills. While many of them waxed lyrical about Eros, Plato, especially actual intimacy, was often treated with suspicion or intellectual distance. The symposium is essentially a bunch of men sitting around talking about love instead of actually experiencing it. Desire was seen as a disruptive force, unless it could be turned into something loftier like the pursuit of wisdom, which sounds noble until you're the one holding grapes. From across the grove, you hear another attempt. Her, "Do you believe in love at first sight?" Him, "I believe in recognition of pre-existing soul forms, but sight is the least reliable sense." Her, "Right." She retreats. You wince in sympathy. Fringe tidbit. There's a letter, possibly apocryphal, written by an Athenian woman to a philosopher in which she thanks him for explaining why her affection was a misdirected longing for the eternal. She ends with, "My longing remains, but now it's for quiet." You're handed a cup of watered wine by a passing student who shrugs and says, "Don't worry, he once compared affection to mold. You're not alone." Nearby, a group of students are debating whether touch can ever be purely physical, or if it always carries moral implication. One suggests that holding hands is just unspoken dialectic. Another claims it's a metaphysical leap across the abyss of self. Someone sighs and says, "I just miss my girlfriend." You sit with them a while watching the woman try again. This time she reads him a poem. "Your voice is a branch reaching into the flame. I am the leaf not yet burned." He frowns. Flames are unstable metaphors. Also, are you comparing me to fire or furniture? She drops the scroll. Historians still argue whether the great philosophers had fulfilling romantic lives. Plato seems to advocate for a love that transcends the body ideal forms, perfect souls touching but never smudging each other. Aristotle, ever the practical one, acknowledges affection as necessary for friendship, but doesn't dwell on the warm fuzzies. Diogenes famously lived in a barrel and once told someone to get out of my sunlight so you can guess where he stood. You overhear a nearby conversation. Student A: "Didn't Socrates have a wife?" Student B: "Yes, Xanthippe. She allegedly threw a jug at his head once." A romantic. B: "He called it educational." You get up and walk deeper into the grove. A small stone bench is carved with the phrase, "Know thyself." And maybe don't start with flattery. You find a scroll tucked beneath the seat. It's titled, "How to Compliment a Philosopher Without Losing Your Dignity." You open it curious. It reads, "Avoid physical compliments. They think you're distracting them. Ask them a question they can't answer. They'll respect you, then panic. Laugh at their analogy, but then offer a better one. If all else fails, mention Plato, but misquote him just enough to start a debate." You hear laughter again. The woman has given up the frontal assault and is now debating the philosopher on the ethics of personal grooming. He's animated. She's engaged. Someone passes her a fresh scroll and says, "Now that's foreplay." Fringe tip from a bystander. Never lead with desire, lead with contradiction. Then watch them lean in. Later, the philosopher rises, bows to her, and offers his scroll. It's a list of his favorite paradoxes. She reads the first one, smiles. It might not be poetry, but it's something. You walk away as the sun begins to lower, casting long shadows across the grove. Philosophers still talk, students still scribble, and the woman with the grapes she's no longer chasing, she's challenging. And the philosopher, he's smiling. It turns out even the most logic-wrapped minds can be moved not by beauty, but by someone who dares to ask a better question. So if you ever find yourself trying to seduce a philosopher, remember it's not about looking good. It's about making them think twice. Love in the time of oracles. The road to Delphi is narrow and winding, carved like a question into the mountains. The air thins as you ascend, each step dusted with time and prophecy. You pass pilgrims clutching offerings, philosophers muttering hopes under their breath, and one man who insists he's going to ask the oracle whether his beard will ever grow in properly. You, however, are here for a different kind of answer. Because where logic fails, where diagrams stutter and scrolls contradict themselves, there is still the Pythia, the oracle of Apollo, perched in her cave breathing in sacred vapors and spitting out truths dressed as riddles. And occasionally people come to her with questions about love. Mainstream fact. The oracle at Delphi was one of the most revered prophetic sites in the ancient world. The Pythia, usually a middle-aged woman chosen for her piety, sat atop a tripod in the temple, often after inhaling gases from a chasm in the rock. She answered questions posed by kings, generals, and commoners alike, often in cryptic verse that could be interpreted several ways. Yes, people absolutely asked about romance. As you reach the temple's high courtyard, the scent of laurel and burnt honey wraps around you. Offerings clutter the steps. Figurines, coins, fruit, and more than one papyrus inscribed with the words, "Please let them notice me." A man just ahead of you steps forward. He kneels, whispers something, and the priest relays it to the oracle. The Pythia leans forward, eyes glazed, and says, "You will not catch the fox, but the dust of her will cling to your hands." He looks devastated, so that's a no. Fringe tidbit. A fragment from a lesser-known Delphic inscription mentions a young woman who came asking if the man she loved would return. The response? If he crosses the river twice and does not turn to salt, then yes. Some believe this was metaphor. Others suspect he simply owed a lot of money. You're invited to present your own question. You hesitate, then ask, "What should I do if I love someone who does not love me back?" The oracle replies softly, "Build your house from doors that open inward. Let her knock or let her pass." You're not sure if that's permission, a challenge, or a suggestion to take up carpentry. But it sounds poetic, and that's half the point. Historians still argue whether oracles were truly spiritual intermediaries or tools of political and social influence. In matters of love, the ambiguity may have been the appeal. A definite yes or no can fracture the heart. A metaphor that lingers, gnaws gently, keeps hope breathing just a little longer. Nearby, a woman consults the oracle about whether to stay in her marriage. The answer? You are the anchor, but you were meant to be the sail. She nods, leaves her ring on the altar, walks away. Elsewhere, two men ask together quietly, one hand brushing the other, if their bond will be accepted. The oracle closes her eyes and says, "You were seen before you were spoken. That is enough." They breathe out as if they've been holding it for years. You wander among the carved stones after where pilgrims have left their own miniature oracles. Some are scratched into rock, others painted, folded, buried. You find one that reads, "If she laughs at the same joke twice, you are halfway there." Another, "He said goodbye like it was practice." Some seem prophetic, others feel like confessions. You sit near the spring that feeds the temple its waters once thought to grant clarity. You dip your fingers in. It's cold, honest. You imagine someone long ago standing here in secret asking the water instead of the oracle. Does she miss me when it rains? You walk the path back down in silence, the sun turning the valley below into a tapestry of gold and olive. A priest nods as you pass as if to say, "Good question," or maybe better luck next time. You reach a small shrine just outside the temple, hidden behind a cluster of wild fennel. Inside a faded inscription, "I asked the oracle if he loved me. She said, 'Ask yourself, then listen twice.'" You touch the stone, smile faintly, and leave a sprig of laurel behind. No diagrams, no scroll, just a whisper in the mountain air. Maybe love isn't something we answer. Maybe it's the question that keeps the heart awake. Lovers and liars in the marketplace. You wake to the chorus of commerce, goat bleats, coin clinks, olive oil vendors hawking their deals with voices honed like daggers. The agora is alive, tangled in trade and flirtation. Today you're here not for figs or sandals, but to observe how love plays out under the canopy of linen tents and economic transactions. And let's be clear, the ancient Greek marketplace was not just for buying barley. It was for making declarations, spying from behind amphorae, dropping accidental compliments on people handling grapes. This was love's least subtle hunting ground. Mainstream fact. The agora was the social, political, and economic center of every Greek city-state, but it also functioned as a cultural and emotional one. People met here, argued here, and yes, courted here. Even Socrates used to wander the agora, striking up conversations about virtue justice, and occasionally confusing the vendors out of sales entirely. You pass a perfume seller laying out his goods who waves you closer and murmurs, "First scent is free. Second costs a compliment." You tell him he has excellent eyebrows. He nods. Acceptable. A little further on, two women pretend to examine fish, but are clearly just using the display to whisper behind it. One says he said he'd meet me by the west gate. I waited through 2 amphora deliveries and a priest's blessing a chicken. The other replies, "And you're still waiting." I'm thinking about waiting. Fringe tidbit. One recovered inscription from a pot shard in the agora reads, "If you seek her, follow the scent of cinnamon and the sound of 2 arguments at once." Historians suspect it was part of a hidden message or joke between friends, or lovers, or both. At a fabric stall, a man smooths a bolt of linen with suspicious care while a young woman stands nearby picking non-existent lint from her hem. You watch him finally say, "This shade reminds me of something I once saw near a temple." She replies, "Try again with a better metaphor." And just like that, they're walking. You duck into a shadowed colonnade and watch the symphony of minor performances. The seller who places a coin exactly where his favorite customer will touch it. The girl pretending to be confused about the price of time. The boy arguing far too hard about the superiority of figs over dates while blushing wildly. Historians still argue whether public flirting in places like the agora was tolerated, discouraged, or just hilariously inevitable. Some city-states had codes of decorum. Others turned a blind eye unless it disrupted business. But vase art and graffiti suggest that even in commerce, the heart has its say. You notice an older man carving tiny birds into the corner of a stall. You ask him why. He says, "My wife used to buy her spices here. I carve a bird every year she doesn't come back." You ask if they're for her. "No," he says. "They're for me. So I don't forget what it felt like to wait." You leave quietly. At the wine shop, a sign reads, 2 amphorae for 1 kiss must be mutual. You hear laughter from within. A voice says, that's an expensive kiss. Another replies only if it's the wrong person. Later, a commotion breaks out near the olive oil stall. A woman's voice rings out, if your love is as pure as this oil, why did you spill it on someone else's robe? Gasps. Someone drops a grape. The accused man fumbles. She was a friend. She was wearing my bracelet. More gasps. You casually retreat behind a pomegranate cart. Fringe detail. In one ancient comedy, a merchant tries to seduce a customer by giving her incorrect change and then claiming it's a metaphor for how relationships require emotional rounding errors. He ends up covered in chickpeas. You wander toward the edge of the agora where fewer people linger. A stall sits empty except for a single scroll nailed to the post. It reads, if you love me the way you haggle, firm, patient, smiling, we'd still be buying fruit together. You linger, the ink is faded, the post is cracked, but the words hold. Maybe love in the agora isn't poetic. Maybe it's messy, sticky, half-shouted over produce and crushed under sandal heels. But it's also alive, immediate, willing to risk dignity for attention. Before you go, you stop at a stall selling ribbon and trinkets. You buy a small wooden token carved into the shape of a laurel leaf. You leave it on a bench near the perfume seller. No name, no explanation. Just a whisper tucked between the sound of barter and the scent of cinnamon dot. When gods got involved and ruined everything. You're walking again, dust rising lazily behind your steps, the afternoon sun giving everything that warm, theatrical glow that makes even the most questionable choices look like destiny. And today you're headed straight into myth, the place where love was less quiet dinner and more cosmic incident, involving swan's revenge and unwise golden apples. Because when it came to love, the Greek gods did not know how to mind their own business. Mainstream fact. The gods of Olympus were deeply involved in human love stories, sometimes as patrons, sometimes as instigators, and occasionally as jealous participants. Aphrodite meddled. Zeus seduced or disguised himself as a bull, and then seduced Hera raged. And poor mortals were often left writing odes to explain why their lives had suddenly turned into a dramatic mess. You pause beneath a half-crumbled column and an old storyteller beckons you over. He pats the stone beside him and says, you look like someone who needs to hear about when love went terribly gloriously wrong. You sit, you do. He begins, of course, with Paris and the golden apple. 3 goddesses, he says, each convinced she was the fairest. A mortal prince flattered and confused. Aphrodite promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, and just like that, boom. 10 years of war, thousands dead, all because someone wanted to be chosen. You nod. You've heard this one, but you've never thought about the scale of it. One flirty bribe and suddenly cities are burning. Fringe tidbit. In one rare version of the myth, Paris initially chooses Athena, not Aphrodite. But she turns him down because her offer came with fine print. You will win wisdom, but lose desire. Aphrodite's pitch may have been riskier, but it came with better lighting. You ask the storyteller which god ruined the most love stories. Oh, that's easy, he says. Zeus. He lists the greatest hits. Io transformed into a cow. Leda approached by Zeus in the form of a swan. Europa swept away by a bull with suspiciously intelligent eyes. Every tale is soaked in symbolism, some of it beautiful, much of it, well, deeply troubling. Consent was not always a concern, the old man mutters. Though in the myths they call it divine will. Historians still argue whether these stories were allegories for natural events, cultural shifts, or coded warnings. Some say the gods' affairs reflect human psychology, our lusts, fears, jealousies, and desires blown up to divine proportions. Others suggest they were invented simply to make sense of the random cruelty of life. If someone breaks your heart or turns into a laurel tree, it helps to blame a higher power. You shift uncomfortable. Some of these stories hit a little close. But it's not all destruction, the old man continues. Sometimes the gods got it right, or at least almost. He tells you about Psyche and Eros. A mortal woman beautiful enough to anger Aphrodite is cursed, but then secretly married to Eros, the god of love himself. He visits her only in darkness. She's not allowed to see his face. Of course, she lights a lamp, he flees, and she's left alone. Her journey to win him back becomes one of the most enduring love myths in the ancient world. She earns him, the man says, through patience, through trials. Not because she was flawless, but because she learned. You lean in. That one sounds almost human. Fringe offering. On a broken temple frieze outside Athens, archaeologists found a partial inscription. He kissed me like Hermes steals quick, quiet, unforgiven. Scholars aren't sure if it was meant as warning or compliment. The storyteller wraps up with a smirk. You know the gods used love like some use thunder. Flashy, loud. Almost always someone gets hurt. You ask if he's ever loved. He chuckles. Once. I told her she reminded me of Artemis. She asked if that meant I thought she was likely to shoot me in the back. And what did you say? I said only if I run. You thank him. He nods, then adds, next time you think your love life is messy, remember someone once turned into a tree rather than return a compliment. You walk away, myth still dancing through your thoughts. As you reach a crossroads, you spot a small shrine to Aphrodite tucked into the corner. At its base are offerings, ribbon rose petals, a carefully folded piece of parchment. You glance around, no one's watching. You unfold it. It reads, if love is a god, then I forgive myself for not always knowing how to worship it properly. You fold it again and place it back just as you found it. Because the gods might ruin everything, but mortals still try. And sometimes trying is the most divine act of all. Love and loss on the battlefield. The sun rises in tones of bronze this morning like it's been polished for war. You wake near a quiet camp on the outskirts of a city you don't recognize, somewhere between myth and memory. Soldiers pass in silence, their armor clinking like uncertain lullabies. And you, drawn by something deeper than curiosity, find yourself tracing the soft edges of love amid the hard geometry of battle. Because love doesn't stop when the spears are raised. Sometimes it begins there. Mainstream fact. Ancient Greek warfare was deeply tied to notions of loyalty, masculinity, and honor. And love often wove itself into the fabric of that world, especially in the relationships between comrades in arms. The bond between warriors wasn't just strategic. It was emotional, sometimes romantic, often complex. Famous pairings like Achilles and Patroclus weren't whispered secrets. They were spoken of with reverence woven into epic poetry. You walk past a tent where two men sit back to back, sharpening blades without speaking. One looks up, notices your gaze, and says, he fights better when he thinks I'm angry with him. The other replies, I fight better when he's near. Neither smiles, but their elbows touch. You step quietly away. Nearby, a young man writes on a scrap of leather with a stub of charcoal. He sees you looking. It's for her, he says, in case I don't return. You read it. I'll miss the way you braid your bread. Not your hair, your bread. You twist it when you're thinking. Save a piece for me. He doesn't sign it, just folds it into his sandal for luck. Fringe tidbit. Archaeologists have found bits of poetry etched inside soldiers' shields, scratched into the inner curve near the grip. One fragment reads, "If I fall, let her know I remembered the apricots." Others include names, jokes, or instructions to friends. Burn this. Don't read it, Philon. I mean it. Across the camp, an older soldier tightens the strap on a younger man's cuirass. The younger man winces slightly and says, "You always pull it too tight. It keeps you upright. It makes me breathless." A pause. Then it's working. Historians still argue whether relationships like that of Achilles and Patroclus were romantic in the modern sense or idealized forms of male companionship. Some scholars point to ritualized practices in places like Thebes, where male couples were encouraged to form bonds within military units. Others suggest the lines between love, loyalty, and brotherhood were intentionally blurred. But here in the quiet before a clash, you see no blur. Just glances, brushings of fingers, words left half said. You find a swordsmith, her fingers blackened forging blades while humming a love song. You ask her about it. She shrugs. He said I shouldn't fight, so I sharpen things instead. Still love him. Always, she says, but from this side of the line. A few tenths over, someone recites a poem aloud. It's raw and jagged like it was written with a spear tip. When I strike, I think of you. When I fall, I hope it's forward so I land facing the wind that once touched your hair. No one claps, but no one walks away either. You hear the horn call? The soldiers begin to gather, straps tightened, helmets adjusted. Some kiss amulets. Others clutch bits of ribbon or beads pressed into their palms by someone who mattered. One pair stands apart, not touching, not speaking, just looking. One nods, the other nods back. It says everything. You retreat to a hillside overlooking the field. The battle, when it comes, is brief. Dust clouds rise, shields clash. Somewhere a trumpet breaks mid-note. When the dust clears, not everyone is standing. Later among the fallen, someone finds a bloodied sash embroidered with 2 initials. It's knotted around the hilt of a sword which had been buried to the handle in the ground, left upright like a marker. No body, just the blade and the cloth. You ask the nearest survivor if he knows whose it was. He just says it wasn't mine, but it mattered. That night, a fire crackles low. The survivors sit in small circles, not drinking, not celebrating, just remembering. Someone murmurs, "He kissed me once, not on the mouth." Here. They tap their shoulder. Where the armor meets the skin. You lie down with the smell of smoke in your hair and the sound of lullabies sung off-key around the embers. Love lingers here, unapologetic, unpolished. Not always requited, not always explained, but always real. Because even in war, the heart marches. And sometimes it carries more than a shield. Scratched in temple walls. You've left behind the clang of shields and the hushed laments of battle. Now the path carries you upward again toward a temple pressed into the side of a quiet mountain. The gods here aren't the loud ones, no thunderbolts, no golden chariots. This is a sanctuary of whispers of hope carved into stone in the dead of night. And if you look closely, the walls still remember. This temple, small, unadorned, nearly forgotten, is dedicated to Himeros, the god of yearning. Not love fulfilled, not love won, just The ache. The wind brushes your cheek like someone passing by without stopping. You step under the worn archway where petals have crumbled into the dust, and prayers stick between the cracks like secrets held too long. And then you see them. Tiny messages, hundreds of them. Some carved deep, others barely traced. Not official inscriptions, these are personal, illicit, private. Scratched into the walls, the floor, even the pillars. Mainstream fact. Ancient sanctuaries often hosted votive graffiti left by worshippers, names, prayers, and declarations etched in moments of private desperation or joy. These inscriptions were rarely sanctioned by priests and often hidden from plain view. But they remained centuries later stubborn records of real people who hoped the divine was listening. You kneel beside one faded line. She said I had no courage, so I carved this at night barefoot. The next one is deeper, angrier. He kissed me once, then said he didn't remember. The gods know, I do. Some are sweet. We met beside the olives. I asked for salt. He gave me his name, Fringe Tidbit. At one rural sanctuary, an inscription simply reads, I waited 7 hours, that is enough. Archaeologists think it might have been part of a personal ritual of release, leaving pain behind as an offering. Or just someone drawing a line in olive oil slicked sand. You trace your fingers along a curling message hidden behind a broken votive niche. It says, if you find this, tell him I forgave him, even when he dropped the cup, even when he left. You wonder if he ever found it, or if it was meant for you. Historians still argue whether these personal inscriptions were desperate acts of devotion or simply human moment scratches of emotion too raw to keep in. Some scholars suggest certain temples encouraged them unofficially. Others believe they were forbidden, and that's why they mattered more. You walk further in. On the floor, someone has etched a poem with careful looping script, clearly written by someone who wanted to be read, not remembered. My love was not quiet. It sang. You told me to hush, but I still hum when I dream. A small offering dish rests nearby, holding nothing but a sprig of dried rosemary. Further along the back wall, where the stone is smoother, the inscriptions get bolder. One reads, I loved him even after he prayed for someone else. Another, she wore the laurel I left. That was enough. And near the altar, long, dry, cracked from time, someone has left a clay token carved with 2 entwined names, weathered, nearly invisible. Beside it is one last inscription. We couldn't be seen, so we were etched. You sit there for a while, breathing in the quiet, listening to ghosts not haunting but confessing. You realize this isn't just a temple. It's a diary. 1,000 beating hearts pressed into stone so the gods and strangers might witness what they couldn't say aloud. You dig into your satchel and pull out a scrap of fabric from your earlier days on the road. You tear a thin strip and tie it to a low branch of the olive tree just outside the entrance. You don't carve anything, but you think something, and that's enough. As you walk back down the slope, the wind picks up. It curls around the branches, lifts your hem, whispers nothing useful but everything honest. Maybe love is like that too. Not always spoken, but always heard. Forbidden love and the price of silence. It's dusk again. The sky folds itself into a bruised lavender and Athens glows in halftones. Lamplight blooming slowly in alleys and along porticos, just enough to see but not enough to say everything out loud. Tonight the air feels hushed, not from sleep but from secrets. You're walking a quieter path, the kind not marked on city maps. The kind worn only by feet that have something to hide. Because tonight you're following the shape of forbidden love, the kinds that left no statues, no public poems, no cheerful mosaics of smiling couples. The kinds tucked into folds of silence, passed hand to hand in darkness, pressed into memory like a pressed flower between heavy books. Mainstream fact. In ancient Greece, relationships that fell outside the sanctioned norms, whether due to class citizenship, gender, or status, were often socially and sometimes legally discouraged or outright forbidden. Though same-sex relationships between men were culturally acknowledged, they still carried rules around age hierarchy and visibility. Love that crossed social boundaries, like between a citizen and a slave or two women, was often shrouded in secrecy. You pass a narrow doorway carved with a faint symbol, two circles linked by a line. No inscription, just enough to be a meeting place if you knew what to look for. Inside, a candle glows low. A woman sits by the flame mending cloth. You nod. She doesn't speak but gestures to the back. You find a room lined with cushions, scrolls, and a few weathered tokens. Bracelets, hairpins, a child's sandal, a pressed olive leaf. A shrine of forgotten promises. On one wall, a soft etched message. I called her sister. It was the only word they'd let me say. Your breath catches. You sit down, careful not to disturb the silence. It's not empty, it's crowded. With footsteps not taken, letters not sent, names never spoken in the daylight. Fringe tidbit. One rare papyrus fragment unearthed in a well outside Lesbos contains what may be the only surviving first-person account of a female lover from the classical period. The text is incomplete, but it includes the line, I learned to pray for her safety instead of her touch. The gods seemed more comfortable that way. You run your fingers along another wall carving. We kissed once behind the water jars. He said it was a mistake. I said it was a miracle. A set of soft sandals rest beside it, worn through at the toes. You wonder how many hearts lived in the shadow of other people's rules. How many quiet breakfasts between companions were mistaken for coincidence? How many fingers brushed in theaters only to recoil when someone looked? Historians still argue whether relationships outside the heterosexual citizen-appropriate mold were rare or just rarely recorded. Most written records come from elite men with elite problems. But where the scrolls are silent, the scraps speak initials carved into hidden corners. Coded love poetry slipped into baskets of figs. Rings found buried together, worn smooth with shared time. You find a tiny painted fragment black figure art showing two women, arms draped around each other, one whispering into the other's ear. Her eyes are wide, laughing. You've never seen her in a textbook, and that somehow says everything. At the far end of the room, a low platform holds what might once have been a communal bowl or a makeshift altar. Scrawled around its rim, we loved. No chorus sang, so we wrote our own. You sit with that, longer than you meant to, and when you rise, you understand something new. That the silence of forbidden love isn't always empty. It's protective, defiant, full of presence, just undocumented. Outside, the woman still sews. You leave behind a ribbon, simple, clean, not tied to anything, not carved, just placed. A message only some will understand. You take the long way home, past a column where someone scratched. If I could write her name, I would do it in honey, so even the wasps would know. No one walks beside you, but somehow you feel less alone. Maybe because someone once did this walk too. and left you a trail to follow dot festival nights and accidental proposals. The sky is pulsing now, thick with drum beats and laughter, ribbons of smoke and perfume unraveling above the city. You've wandered into the Dionysia, a festival so chaotic it could only be hosted in honor of the god of wine madness and poorly timed confessions. Torches flicker along every street. Musicians improvise with lyres, flutes, and what appears to be two goatskin bags and a spoon. Everywhere you turn, people are dancing or declaiming poetry or falling over in a joyful heap. You're jostled, spun offered a fig wrapped in honey-soaked vine leaf, and invited to join 3 separate parades, 2 of which are probably illegal. Tonight is not about rules. Tonight is about risk. Mainstream fact. The city Dionysia was one of the largest festivals in ancient Athens dedicated to Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and drama. It involved public performance, religious rituals, drinking, and behavior that in any other context would have raised eyebrows and possibly incited lawsuits. It was also one of the few times when social roles loosened and declarations of love, lust, and all things in between slipped out more freely than usual. A woman grabs your hand and yells over the noise. Have you ever loved someone so much you forget how to walk? You open your mouth to answer. She's already dancing away with someone else. You duck under a canopy of trailing vines where couples and strangers sway together in a rhythm older than marriage contracts. A man pours wine into your cup and says, "This is from a vineyard that only ripens when someone kisses you in the rain." You sip it. It tastes like grapefruit and high expectations. Fringe tidbit. At certain festivals, including the Anthesteria and Dionysia, it was not uncommon for individuals to make spontaneous marriage declarations, often fueled by wine and theater-induced passion. These weren't always legally binding, but at least one surviving record suggests a man tried to argue in court that a woman agreed to wed him by sharing her pomegranate seeds under moonlight. He lost the case, but won local fame as a poetic fool. You pass a crowd chanting improvised hymns to Aphrodite, which mostly seem to involve rhyming words with kiss. Someone yells, "I found love. He sells garlic." You stop when you hear a voice nearby say quite seriously, "You are my chorus." You look over. A tall woman is holding a wreath of ivy. The man beside her looks stunned. "Are you asking me something?" he says. "I think I might be." Everyone within earshot immediately starts banging on whatever instrument they can find. A goat bleats in approval. Historians still argue whether these festival night declarations were theatrical fun or secretly sacred rites. Some scholars believe Dionysian chaos was a pressure valve for repressed emotion. Others suggest the gods' rituals were dead serious and that many lasting partnerships started under a sky thick with incense and poor decisions. You turn a corner and are handed a wax tablet. "Write something," says a youth in golden face paint. "Something real." You etch, "If you kiss me by mistake, I'll believe it was fate." He reads it, smiles, someone's getting kissed. You flee, just a little. You pass a troupe performing a tragicomedy about a man who fell in love with his own echo. It ends with him singing a love song to an amphora. People weep. The amphora gets a standing ovation. You find a quieter street, but even here there's music leaking through the cracks and the air is warm with candle smoke and crushed herbs. Someone sings a hymn to a lost lover while balancing on a barrel. You're about to keep walking when a woman you don't know takes your hand. She says I don't want to remember this tomorrow. So will you remember it for me? You nod and dance, just once. There's no name exchange, no promises, just rhythm and torchlight and something that might live in your bones longer than it has any right to. Later, as the festival wanes, you sit beneath a fig tree and watch couples lean into each other with that exhausted, dreamy gravity of people who made fools of themselves on purpose. A man nearby is trying to unpropose. What I meant was that you have strong wrists. Not that we should name our children after constellations. She replies too late, I've already picked a star. Fringe graffiti spotted on the festival walls, he said it was a joke. I said I'd take it seriously if he ever says it again sober. You leave a pomegranate seed on a stone step, just one. A quiet invitation for someone else's chaos? Tonight love is messy and immediate and a little wine-stained. But it's here. And if you accidentally promise someone your whole heart beneath a torch and a fig tree, well, you wouldn't be the first. Old lover's older letters. It's morning now, but a gentle one. The light doesn't jab it. Drapes like old linen left on a warm sill. You follow a winding path through the edge of the city where voices soften and the stones underfoot are worn smooth by generations. There are fewer temples here, fewer amphorae being dropped. Just simple homes, ivy-cloaked courtyards, and the long, slow sound of memory. You've come to visit a place the young rarely think about where the lovers went after. Not the first kiss, not the dramatic goodbye, just the long middle, the after, the part nobody puts in a poem. Mainstream fact. While most surviving Greek texts about love focus on youth and desire, there are a few quiet references to enduring affection in later life. Letters, contracts, and grave inscriptions hint at couples who shared decades, not just moments often without ceremony, but with remarkable steadiness. You arrive at a small house ringed with time. An old man in a threadbare chiton offers you a stool of fig and silence. After a while, he begins to speak not as a performance, but like dust shaken from a keepsake box. She was louder than the market, he says. When we argued, the olives leaned away. You ask if they stayed together. He smiles. No, she married someone else, but she sent letters. He shuffles into the house and returns with a small clay jar. Inside, folded and tied with ribbon, are scraps of parchment. The ink is fading, the corners worn. He hands you one. You left your sandal. I kept it. You left your scent on my pillow. I washed it twice. Still there. You ask why he never threw them away. She'd spelled my name wrong, he says. Every time. On purpose. Said it sounded softer that way. Fringe tidbit. A preserved ostrakhan, a pottery shard used as a notepad from an old Theban household, includes a love letter so poorly written, filled with crossed-out lines and misspellings that archaeologists debated whether it was meant as satire. But the last line reads, I practiced this 12 times. I hope it sounds like me. You spend the day listening to stories of missed connections that never quite unmissed, of brief affairs that stretched into decades of memory, of letters sent every new moon just in case the other was still watching the sky. One story stays with you, a woman named Dione, who married at 20, divorced by 26, and then lived with her former lover as neighbors for 30 years. They passed messages on bread, never lived together, never apart. She said it was enough to share a bakery wall, the old man explains. That way we both heard the oven. Historians still argue whether later life love was romanticized or mostly ignored in classical literature. The spotlight typically fell on youthful beauty and drama, but gravestones and domestic records tell a quieter story, one where love didn't fade, just changed shape. Sometimes it turned into friendship, sometimes into ritual, and sometimes into a kind of absence that still filled the room. You walk through a modest graveyard on the hill. One stone reads, "To my wife who sang to me in winter and never once asked if I was listening. I was." Another more worn, "He remembered my tea. Every day for 47 years, even after the war, even after I forgot." You sit there for a while. No performances, no masks, just what remains. Back at the old man's home, he hands you a scrap of papyrus unrolled and blank. "What is it, you ask?" "Yours now," he says. "Not every letter has to be sent." You fold it, tuck it into your belt. As you leave, you hear him call out, "If you find her H, the one who smelled of rosemary and bad ideas, tell her I still remember the sandal." You promise you will, even if she's no longer in this world or yours. Because love doesn't always leave. Sometimes it settles in, familiar as a song without a tune or a name, pronounced a little softer than it used to be. The diagrams they didn't show you. You're back in Athens now, tucked inside a dusty side room of the great library, a place that smells like old glue and older secrets. Scrolls lean against one another like sleepy gossipers, and somewhere in this dry whisper of parchment and lamp smoke, you find the shelf no one talks about, the one where the diagrams live. Yes, those diagrams. Not quite what you expected, no sharp geometry or clean labeling. These are loose sketches, hurried doodles, deeply impractical stick figures. Some are comically earnest, others suspiciously confident. And all of them were someone's idea of education. Mainstream fact. While ancient Greece is known for its philosophical texts and anatomical studies, there also existed more private or instructional erotic manuscripts, often attributed perhaps falsely to figures like Philinus of Samos. These texts included poetic advice, practical tips, and in rare cases, crude diagrams drawn with enough ambiguity to make even a vase blush. You unroll the first scroll. It's a mixture of instructions and commentary. Let the thigh meet the thigh not with force, but with gravity's consent. If the knee creaks, the gods are merely laughing. Charming, confusing, possibly dangerous. The accompanying sketch. Two figures that appear to be engaging in something ambitious on a sloped surface. One has a face, the other has possibly a dog. You move on. The next scroll is subtitled "For Lovers Who Cannot Agree on Whose Elbow Goes Where." The diagrams here are more detailed, complete with arrows and labels like "preferred angle" and "beware of column." One has a warning in red ink, "Not advised near furniture with corners." You snort. Fringe tidbit. A surviving Byzantine copy of what scholars believe was based on a Hellenistic-era manual includes a marginal note in Greek that reads, "This position was attempted during festival, resulted in dislocated knee and a very angry goose." Whether this was annotation or editorial is still under debate. As you study the sketches, you notice something unexpected. Some of them are just sweet. A figure reaching out gently, touching the other's hair. A shared blanket. One scroll simply contains the drawing of two people sitting holding a fig between them. No instructions, just stillness. You trace the line work with your finger. Maybe not everything was about technique. Historians still argue whether guides like these were taken seriously or simply part of the comedic, even parodic tradition of Greek literature. Some suggest they were used by courtesans or teachers of love arts. Others think they were private jokes passed between friends or lovers who'd rather draw than explain. On the edge of one scroll, someone has scribbled, "She laughed at this one, said it would never work. We tried it anyway. It worked. Once." Another reads, "He drew this to cheer me up. It's upside down. But I kept it." You notice that as the scrolls progress, they become less about physicality and more about rhythm presence and tone. One section is simply titled Listening. The diagram here is a line spiraling inward. Beside it, someone wrote, "Touch without hands, see without eyes. You'll know when you're doing it right." Further down the shelf, you find the fabled Manual of Philanus, or one of its copies. The cover illustration shows two figures reclining, one with a lyre, the other feeding grapes to a chicken. Interpret as you will. Inside are fragments like, "Begin with the left shoulder, always the left, trust me." And, "If they laugh, you are halfway there. If they stop, try the knees." You find yourself smiling. Not because of the absurdity, though there's plenty, but because beneath the diagrams, the ink, the crumpled edges, you hear something unmistakable. They were trying to understand closeness, to explain joy, to prepare others for awkward limbs and held breaths and the miracle of shared space. One scroll ends abruptly, but the last lines read, "No diagram can tell you how to wait for their breath or what to do when they say your name like a question." You roll it carefully back up. Maybe that's the lesson these forgotten diagrams offer, not a guide, but a gesture. A wink from across time. A reminder that no one, not even the Greeks, really knew what they were doing. But they cared. They risked papyrus and ridicule and ink-stained fingers trying to get it right. And sometimes that's enough. The last kiss carved in marble. You arrive at the foot of the necropolis just as the shadows grow long, softening everything into sculpture. Time slows here. The city's heartbeat dims. Above you rise columns and headstones, statues draped in stone robes, eyes carved to stare forever at nothing in particular. This is where the lovers who stayed and the ones who left too soon are remembered. You walk gently like your footsteps might wake them. Mainstream fact. Ancient Greek grave markers called steles often featured reliefs of the deceased in quiet, intimate moments. Shaking hands, exchanging gazes, touching a small item. These scenes weren't dramatic, they were domestic, restrained. A final frozen echo of life's simplest tenderness. You pause before one, a seated woman offering a small bird to a standing man. Their fingers don't quite touch. The bird is caught in mid-flight or perhaps mid-gift. No names, no inscription, just that forever almost. Fringe tidbit: one recovered funerary stele from Thessaly features two women holding hands beneath a carved fig tree. The official record lists them as companions, but a scratched message on the base reads, "She kept the seeds for me." Scholars still debate what that means, but you don't. You continue along a curve in the path and come upon a marble slab partly overgrown with time. Someone has carved a quote beneath the relief of two figures seated on a bench. "He never said goodbye, so I never stopped waiting." You exhale slowly. The wind smells like lavender and cold stone. Elsewhere, another gravestone shows a man holding a lyre, his other hand resting gently on a sleeping dog. Beside him, a younger man leans in close, but not touching. The inscription below is unusually personal. "He laughed at my worst songs, and I sang them all again just for that." You find a bench nearby. The sun is pooling now thick and honey-colored, and everything is quiet except the wind threading through the olive trees. Historians still argue whether these grave scenes were meant to show literal relationships or symbolic ideals. Some claim they were aspirational portraits of what the dead had hoped for, not necessarily what they had. Others believe they were honest one last chance to say, "This mattered." You sit and think about all the love stories that didn't make it onto marble. The ones whispered in fields folded into letters, scratched into the backs of amphorae sung in drunken chorus at Dionysian festivals or carried quietly in pockets through years of silence. You reach into your satchel and pull out the blank papyrus the old man gave you. You write just one line. "I knew you loved me when you let me leave." You fold it, press it between the slats of that bench, and stand. As you walk away, the shadows stretch, the sky melts to peach and violet, and the statues watch not out of judgment, but out of memory. And memory, like love, never really leaves. It simply waits. And now, let's ease down together into the gentle breath of night. The wind is slower now, softer. The olive branches hush themselves, and even the marble seems to lose its edges. Your body, too, begins to settle, shoulders loosening, thoughts dimming to glimmers. Let go of the scrolls, the sandals, the old letters pressed into stone. Let the ancient diagrams fade from your fingers. You're no longer walking ancient streets. You're floating through a calm dusk past flickering torches and abandoned fig carts, past temples whose doors no longer close. You're drifting now. And somewhere someone once wrote your name in honey. Sleep finds you not with fanfare, but like a familiar voice across a quiet room. A final whisper. You were loved. You are loved. You will love again. Shh. Sweet dreams.